HOA: Karen burns down my hunting lodge and owes $800,000. In a small, peaceful corner of the Appalachian foothills, one man's battle against an overreaching HOA president escalates into a legal and personal war that would forever change his life. This is the story of John Mason, a former military officer and sheriff who found himself up against Karen Henson, the self-proclaimed HOA president with a thirst for control. What began as a simple property dispute soon spiraled into a shocking series of events: arson, fraud, and a fight for justice that would see Karen's once untouchable power crumble before the truth. After Karen intentionally set fire to John's family hunting lodge, a piece of his father's legacy, the battle turned from personal vendetta to a fight for justice. With the weight of fraud and manipulation on her shoulders, Karen found herself facing a staggering $800,000 in damages, all while John Mason set out to rebuild more than just his father's home, but a sense of justice in a community that had been under her thumb for far too long. This isn't just a story of arson and legal retribution. It's a powerful reminder of the lengths some will go to abuse their power and the incredible strength of those who refuse to back down. But what's even more shocking is the truth behind Karen's actions and how far she was willing to go to protect her facade of control. Now, here's the question for you. What do you think of Karen's actions? Do you believe the punishment fit the crime, or was the entire situation an example of how power can be misused in local communities? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And trust me, you won't want to miss the twists and turns in this incredible story. Stay with us until the very end. My name is John Mason, and I am a former soldier. After serving 20 years in the military, I returned to my hometown, a small county nestled within the Appalachian Mountains, to care for my father after he had his first stroke. My hometown is a peaceful place, where winding roads, dense forests, and friendly locals waving at you every morning, even if they don't like you, are commonplace. As someone who has witnessed many changes, both in and outside the military, I learned how to be patient, persistent, and to face challenges calmly. But nothing could compare to the challenge I was about to face when I returned to care for my father and discovered that the greatest legacy he left me wasn't just survival lessons, but a hunting cabin he built with his own hands over the span of 30 years. This cabin was not just an ordinary house. It wasn't merely wood and steel. It was a part of my family's history, where my father taught me everything I needed to know about patience, endurance, and, most importantly, resilience in times of hardship. If viewed from afar, the cabin might seem like a simple wooden structure, but to me, it was a priceless heritage. My father always said it was not just a house, but his church, where he spent years of hard labor, and where I grew up under his loving care. So, when I returned from the military, the cabin was not just a home, but a spiritual anchor, a connection to the past and family, a place that held irreplaceable memories. Everything, from the solid wood beams to the small table where my father often sat reading, carried the marks of a life dedicated to the land and family. And I, just a son, held not only a house in my hands but the entire story of my father, a story that had never been fully told. My life, which seemed peaceful, was soon disrupted by a woman named Karen Henson. She was the president of the HOA, Homeowners Association, in the Sycamore Bluff neighborhood, which was only a few miles away from my home. Little did I know that Karen's arrival would mark the beginning of a long legal battle. Karen, who had just gone through a divorce, began to take control within the community. Perhaps as a way to fill the gap in her personal life, she decided that the HOA wasn't just a management body, but an absolute power that everyone had to follow. Every day, I heard about her through HOA meetings, where she sought to impose strict regulations on every corner of Sycamore Bluff. The problem began when Karen started to take notice of my hunting cabin. Although the cabin was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, it had a small access road leading from her community, and she deemed it a threat to community harmony. She immediately began attempting to enforce the HOA's stringent rules on my land, claiming that what I did on my property affected the so-called aesthetic of the area. I vividly remember the first time Karen appeared at my doorstep. She was holding a long piece of paper, seemingly a copy of the HOA's rules, which she considered the moral code of the entire neighborhood. I was standing outside, amidst the pile of firewood preparing for winter, when I heard the sound of her high heels crunching on the gravel path. Karen's sweet voice rang out. "Hello, I'm Karen Henson, the president of the Sycamore Bluff HOA. I think we need to talk about your house." I looked up, wiped my hands on the rag, and looked at her. "Could you clarify? My house is mine. It has nothing to do with the HOA. Karen was unfazed. She pulled a paper from her bag and held it up as if it were a court order. "But according to HOA regulations, I think we need to discuss the harmony of the neighborhood. Your house doesn't seem to fit the style of Sycamore Bluff." I raised an eyebrow, slightly annoyed. "The style of Sycamore Bluff? Are you talking about this house or the pile of firewood I left outside? Do you even know where this is? This is my land, and I've lived here since 1952. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." Karen smiled, but it was the smile of someone who believed she had absolute power. "You may think that, but because your house is near the HOA area, it affects the overall harmony. And I think we can find a way to improve things, like replacing the untreated wood and covering up the firewood." I looked at her, trying to stay calm. "Didn't you hear me? This land doesn't belong to the HOA, and I'm under no obligation to follow such unreasonable demands. You can't just go around forcing others to follow rules they don't agree with." Karen looked at me with a slightly mocking expression. "You don't have to, but you might find it at least a little necessary to improve the overall image of the area. I'll send you a copy of the regulations and hope you'll cooperate." After the first meeting with Karen, I thought she would realize that not everyone could be easily bullied by the HOA's unreasonable rules. But I was wrong. That was just the beginning of a battle she intended to drag on. In the following days, I received numerous letters from the HOA, all of them fines for reasons I never thought were possible. Each fine was a punch to my patience. Once, I received a notice claiming that the firewood I had left outside was an unsightly object, even though it was just a regular pile of firewood I was using to prepare for winter. Another time, I received a fine for a drainage system not meeting HOA standards, even though that drainage system had been in place long before the HOA existed. Honestly, I began to feel like a criminal just for living in a hunting cabin on my family's land. Then, the next blows didn't just stop at sending fines. Karen kept posting fake signs along the roads leading to my property. Each sign said, "HOA area for residents only," clearly an illegal attempt to seize control. I didn't just remove these signs once, but twice, throwing them into the fire. Yet the very next night, they would appear again, as though an HOA army had secretly installed them when I wasn't looking. Just when I was considering reporting the matter to local authorities, I discovered something that made everything even more serious. One morning, as I was walking around the land to check the situation, I noticed strange traces along the stream near the house. When I got closer, I could hardly believe my eyes. A pile of construction waste, from mortar, broken bricks, to old cement bags, was scattered in the stream, blocking the flow of water. This was a clear act of illegal dumping and environmental pollution. This was not only a violation of environmental protection laws, but also a deliberate attempt to damage my land. I stood there, staring at the trash for a long time, my anger boiling inside. Without needing much thought, I realized who was behind all of this. Karen had gone too far, not just hurting me legally, but also directly harming the environment around me, the place where I grew up and witnessed the beauty of nature. One afternoon, when I returned home after a day of work, I noticed that the electricity in the house had been cut off. Standing in front of the electric meter, I realized it wasn't due to a natural disaster or any technical malfunction, but because of a request from Karen herself. I called the electric company, and the person in charge told me that the HOA had made a request stating that this house is unsafe and uninhabited, even though my father and I still live there. I provided proof of land ownership and requested the power be restored immediately, but I had to wait a long time and send more documentation to verify ownership. She didn't stop there. At this point, I realized that this wasn't just a small dispute anymore. It was a campaign aimed at forcing me off my land, by any means necessary. But I wasn't rushing to react. As my father taught me, patience is the greatest strength. I didn't engage in arguments or act impulsively. Instead, I began collecting evidence. I kept track of every letter she sent, every fake sign she put up, and every illegal act she committed. I installed security cameras around my property to capture every move of the HOA and Karen, and I kept all documents that could prove she was abusing her power. She thought I would give up, but I decided not to let things pass easily. I wanted to prove that no one, even the head of the HOA, could act as if they owned everything around them. And I started preparing for the next legal battle, a battle I would not only win, but also make her pay for what she had done. After Karen's constant infringements, I began to feel like I was standing on the edge of a war with no turning back. But nothing could have prepared me for the next insane act she would commit. It was a wedding she decided to hold right on my land, without asking for permission. One morning, I woke up to see a major change. Along the road leading to my house, where I always saw lush grass and ferns growing around, now stood a huge wedding tent, with white columns and silken drapes fluttering in the wind. I stood there, staring in disbelief at what I was seeing. A crowd had gathered, preparing for an extravagant wedding, all happening right on the land my family had cared for over the years. No one had informed me in advance, not a word of permission, nor even a casual conversation about holding this event. It was my land, the land my father had left to me, and I was never asked if it could be used for any event, let alone setting up such a grand stage. I felt anger rising within me. This was not just an infringement on my property rights, but a blatant insult to me and the effort I had put into protecting this land. As I got closer, I encountered her, Karen, standing among the crowd, commanding like a queen. She smiled when she saw me approach, but that smile only made me angrier. "Hello, John. I just thought your land was beautiful and perfect for a wedding. I asked the organizers to set up the tent. This is my niece's wedding, and I thought it would be wonderful to have it here. After all, this is near the HOA area, so it's fine," Karen said in a tone that was as if she was talking about something trivial. I couldn't believe my ears. "What have you done on my land without asking? Do you think just because it's near the HOA area, you can violate my property rights?" I responded, trying to keep my tone calm, but clearly unable to hide my anger. Karen just smiled, showing no sign of apology or regret. "I just thought you wouldn't mind. This wedding could help raise the value of the area, and maybe we can make everything look nicer." My eyes narrowed. She truly didn't know where the line was. It was time for me to act. I didn't do anything immediately, but I knew I couldn't let her continue infringing on my rights like this. This house wasn't a playground for those who wanted to break the rules. Karen's actions had not only invaded my living space, but also threatened my crops, as she set up the wedding tent right on the soybean field I had cared for all season. As the wedding preparations were reaching their most intense stage, I decided to use a method that would certainly make everyone remember. I went into the garage, where I kept my John Deere fertilizer spreader. This was the tool I used to care for the land, but today, I would use it for a different purpose. I carefully drove the spreader out, aiming it toward the wedding tent. The wedding organizers were bustling around, unaware that a manure storm was about to hit. I flipped the switch, and in an instant, streams of cow manure sprayed everywhere, shattering the perfection they had been building. The wedding turned into chaos immediately. Guests scattered in all directions, some frantically trying to protect their outfits from getting dirty, while the wedding organizers stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Laughter, screams, and curses filled the air, but I just stood there, watching them. This spectacle was my revenge for what Karen had done. She wanted to turn my land into a wedding venue without asking me. Now, I would make sure she would never forget. With a smug smile, I turned and walked away, without a word of apology. The wedding was canceled, and I had sent a clear message to Karen. Never think you can infringe upon what belongs to me without paying the price. Things seemed to have reached the highest point of tension, but I never expected that Karen's invasion would reach a horrific climax like this. My father's house, the precious legacy I had protected for years, was engulfed in a massive fire, and I immediately felt that this wasn't just an ordinary accident. When I returned home after a short business trip, I saw thick black smoke rising from my house. The first feeling was panic, followed by despair. The house my father had painstakingly built over 30 years, the church he had always regarded as sacred, was burning fiercely. Everything, from the wooden beams he had carefully selected to the small table where he sat each night, was now reduced to ash. When the fire department arrived, the flames had spread too quickly, and all that was left were the remnants of a great handcrafted work. My heart ached, but the despair began to transform into something else, a feeling I couldn't deny: doubt. This was not an accident. What made me suspicious from the start was how fast the fire spread. There were no signs of a natural fire, like a lightning strike or a strong wind carrying flames from elsewhere. I remembered the house inspection before I left. It had been safe, with nothing unusual. There had been small signs before, strange actions I hadn't noticed, like odd traces around the land, unclear footsteps, and footprints in the mud behind the house. What made me more certain was that recently, Karen had become too obvious in her actions. She no longer acted covertly, but openly posted fake signs near my land. And now my house was burned down. It couldn't just be a coincidence. I decided I had to get to the bottom of it, and I couldn't trust local authorities without solid evidence. I began reviewing the security cameras I had installed around my land from previous incidents when she had started acting strangely. After hours of reviewing, I finally found what I needed. The images from the security cameras left no doubt. I saw Karen, dressed in camouflage, sneaking around the land in the late afternoon, carrying a red gasoline can. She looked around cautiously, as if fearing someone would see her, before she poured the gasoline around my house. I watched as she set it on fire and quickly ran away as the flames started to spread, growing larger with each passing minute. What I had suspected all along now became undeniable truth. Karen had set my house on fire. After collecting the footage from the security cameras and clear evidence that Karen was responsible for burning my house down, I realized I couldn't act rashly. This wasn't just a regular battle. This was a fight for survival, and I couldn't let my emotions control me. I needed to be sure, gather all the legal evidence, and build an undeniable case. What I did first was be patient. I didn't rush to report to the police or make the matter public immediately. I knew that in order to defeat Karen and extinguish her power, I needed solid evidence, not just from her actions against me, but also from others she had harassed before. I started looking for local residents who had been wronged by Karen. Every threat, every unreasonable fine she had imposed on them, all were important pieces of this case. I began reaching out to residents, especially those who had no way to fight back against her, and listen to their stories. There was an elderly woman named Miss Lorna, who lived in a modest house not far from my land. She told me about how Karen had threatened her over a very silly reason. Miss Lorna had a bird bath in her garden, something Karen considered a serious violation of HOA rules. Karen demanded she dismantle the bird bath and fine her a large amount, even though it was just a simple decoration Miss Lorna had enjoyed for years. I didn't dare oppose her. She told me I could be sued if I didn't comply, Miss Lorna said, her eyes darting nervously at me. It wasn't just Miss Lorna. I also heard the story of Bill, an elderly man who had lived in the area since he was a young boy. Karen fined Bill for using Christmas lights that didn't meet the HOA standards. What was strange was that he was Jewish and used a menorah instead of a Christmas tree. Karen didn't care about Bill's beliefs, only focusing on fining him for not adhering to the community's aesthetic rules. The stories from these people not only made me furious, but also made me realize something important. Karen wasn't just an abuser of power. She was a manipulator, creating a fake HOA with the goal of controlling people and profiting from it. And I started to see a troubling connection. After a few conversations and digging deeper, I discovered that Karen had used sophisticated fraudulent methods to build a completely fake HOA. She had gathered signatures from people who had no idea they were joining the HOA or from those who signed unintentionally. She even forged letters from the HOA board to intimidate residents in the area. Everything she did had no legal value. That meant every fine, all of her demands, were illegal. Not only that, I discovered that she had been using tactics to isolate weaker residents in the area, especially the elderly or those unable to fight back. Some people were threatened with paying unreasonable fines, while others were pressured to withdraw from the HOA community without any legitimate reason. The evidence was becoming clearer and clearer, and everything was falling into place just as I needed. But I knew that gathering evidence was only the first step. I needed to piece all these pieces together to build an irrefutable case and bring Karen to justice. The so-called HOA that Karen had set up was not only a scam, but also an attempt to exploit power illegally. And now, I was ready to take her to court. The day of the trial finally arrived, and I stood there in the courtroom, alongside witnesses, my lawyer, and all the residents who had been abused by Karen's power over the years. The tension in the air was palpable, but I knew everything had been prepared meticulously, and there was no turning back. Karen entered the courtroom, calm and composed, her face showing no emotion. She wore a gray business suit, holding an expensive handbag, and walked confidently, seemingly unaware of her guilt. She glanced around, and I saw a look of arrogance in her eyes, as if she had already won the battle. But I knew this day would be different, and it wouldn't go as she had manipulated in the past. As soon as the trial began, Karen stood up, introduced herself to the court, and began to justify her actions. Her voice was soft but persuasive, as if she were giving a legal lecture. "Your Honor," Karen began, "the fire was an unfortunate accident. Mr. Mason's house caught fire due to an unforeseeable incident. I had no intention of harming him or destroying his property. It was a sudden mishap, and no one wanted this to happen." The courtroom fell silent, and I felt tense hearing her absurd justifications. But I couldn't let her persuade anyone here. Once Karen finished her defense, my lawyer stood up, holding a thick file, and began presenting the evidence. I looked over and saw that the entire process of gathering evidence had been organized in a systematic way. The video footage from security cameras, photos of gasoline traces on the land, and documents detailing Karen's actions in creating a fake HOA were all clearly displayed on a large screen in front of the court. My lawyer pointed to the screen and said, "Your Honor, this is a video from Mr. Mason's surveillance camera. In the video, we can clearly see Mrs. Karen Henson, dressed in camouflage, carrying a gasoline can and walking around Mr. Mason's house. She then sets it on fire, causing the house to burn." The courtroom was silent. No one dared to breathe. Karen sat still, her face changing from confidence to tension. Next, the witnesses began to testify. First was Miss Lorna, an elderly woman who had been threatened by Karen because of the birdbath in her garden. Miss Lorna stood before the court, trembling a little but then recounting in detail how Karen had forced her to remove the birdbath and pay a ridiculous fine for violating HOA rules. "She told me that if I didn't comply, I would be sued," Miss Lorna said, her voice choking with emotion. "I didn't have money to fight her, but I had to comply because I was afraid of getting fined again." Next came Bill, an elderly man, explaining how Karen fined him for using a menorah during Hanukkah. Bill explained that, as a Jew, the menorah was a family tradition, but Karen told him that using a menorah didn't meet HOA standards. "She didn't care about my beliefs. She just wanted me to take it down and pay a fine for the so-called violation of aesthetic standards," Bill said with anger in his voice. Each of their testimonies clarified that Karen was not just someone forcing residents to follow unreasonable rules, but someone using her power to exploit and manipulate the community. When the final verdict was given, the tension in the courtroom was released. Karen, once confident like a queen, now had no way out. The judge recognized all the charges she was responsible for: arson, fraud, and abuse of power. All the evidence I had gathered led to an undeniable conclusion. Karen could not justify her actions of setting my house on fire, creating a fake HOA, or oppressing the residents in the area. Defendant Karen Henson, the judge declared in a stern voice, will be held accountable for her criminal actions. The defendant is convicted of arson, fraud, and abuse of power. The defendant will be required to pay restitution amounting to over $800,000, including repair costs for Mr. Mason's house and damages caused by the defendant's illegal acts. Additionally, the defendant will be required to perform community service for 3 years and serve a 5-year probation period. The courtroom was silent after the judge's ruling. Karen said nothing, standing there with empty eyes, as if unable to believe that everything had ended this way. Those who had been following the trial from outside the courtroom, the victims of her actions, couldn't hide their emotions. Part of me felt relieved, but another part, the part that had fought through all of this, just wanted to see her acknowledge the wrongness of her actions. And then, the most miraculous thing happened. Karen lost everything, not just because of the massive restitution, but because of the destruction of the reputation and power she had built. The lavish house she had once been so proud of was now seized, and no one wanted to live in a house that had been taken over by such a greedy and tyrannical person. No one wanted to be associated with her, and her community was now full of people mocking her downfall. She had to sell her house to pay off the debts, and not long after, There were reports that it had been heavily discounted. No one was coming to view the house anymore, and rumors of the fake HOA and Karen's frauds spread quickly throughout the community. After all the tension and conflict, the community where I lived, those who had suffered under Karen's harassment and oppression, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. We had won, and that victory wasn't just for me, but for everyone who had been exploited by her over the years. That day, when the verdict was given, the community decided to host a barbecue to celebrate the victory and the restoration of peace in the area. The party took place in the park near my house, where Karen had once tried to seize control. Families gathered, grilled meat, chatted, and laughed. Children ran around, no longer worried about ridiculous fines or the boycotts from a fake HOA. I stood there, looking around and feeling the relaxed atmosphere, the sense of peace that I had lost throughout this confrontation. Finally, we had regained our freedom, and not just me, but the entire community felt like they had just finished a long and stressful battle. We had won, not just for one individual, but for all those who had been oppressed, who had endured the tyrannical control of a greedy person. After everything that had happened, after months of facing Karen's greed and abuse of power, I stood before an undeniable truth. My father's hunting cabin, although it had been burned down, still carried the powerful legacy and invaluable spirit that I would never let go of. This wasn't just a house. It was the soul of my family, a symbol of everything my father had built with his own hands over 30 years. But the battle was over, and I decided that now was the time to start over. Not just repairing, but rebuilding this house stronger and more resilient. I wouldn't just fix the burnt parts. I would upgrade the house with modern and safe materials. I installed fire-resistant materials to help the house withstand any future threats. Solar panels were placed on the roof, not only to save on costs, but to show a commitment to a sustainable future, subtly modernizing the living space. But the special thing I wanted to do was carve a new nameplate for the house, a symbol of victory and perseverance. I drew inspiration from the events that had passed and from everything I had learned throughout this struggle. On the plaque, I engraved the words, "Karen Proof since 2024. It wasn't just a statement of resilience, but also an affirmation that people like Karen could not change what had been built with hard work and love. Even though Karen continued to try to fight me, filing appeals, and even sending desperate letters to authorities, the battle was over. She no longer had power, no longer had the support of the fake HOA she had created, and had no tools left to influence me or the community. She lost everything, from her house, her reputation, to every bit of power she once had. Part of me felt relieved to see her face the consequences of her greed and cruelty. However, another part of me also understood that Karen's defeat wasn't just the result of the wrong she had done, but also a cautionary lesson for others. People like Karen, those who abuse power to control others, need to realize that no one can hold on to power when it's built on injustice and the violation of others' rights. My community, those who had endured Karen's oppression, could now live in peace. No more ridiculous fines, no more threats from fake signs, no more boycotts. Everyone felt more secure, and life returned to its normal rhythm. When the hunting cabin was completed, I invited friends and neighbors to come see it. The celebration wasn't just to mark the revival of the house, but also to celebrate the triumph of justice. Everyone was laughing and talking happily, and there was a sense of relief in the air, as if the burdens that had weighed on us for so long had finally been lifted. I stood in the yard, looking at the house that had now been restored to its beauty, but with a new, solid, and modern appearance. And I knew that, no matter what Karen continued to do, I would never let the invasion and abuse of power break what had been built with love and respect. This was a new beginning, not just for me, but for the entire community. A new chapter in my life, with the hunting cabin not only being the place where my family and I lived, but also a testament to perseverance and the strength of justice. As the dust settles and Karen's empire of manipulation crumbles, the story of John Mason proves that justice can prevail, no matter how powerful the opponent. From the ashes of his father's hunting lodge, John rebuilt not only a home, but the trust of a community long overshadowed by Karen's iron grip. The $800,000 penalty and the loss of everything she once controlled were only the beginning of the consequences she faced for her actions. This tale reminds us all that, No matter the odds, standing up for what's right can lead to a victory greater than we ever imagined. What do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? Or was there another way this could have played out? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another shocking HOA story from the HOA Karen files. Thanks for watching. See you in the next episode. HOA destroys the only bridge to my cancer-stricken sister's island. FBI gets involved. In a modern society, where fairness and the rights of every citizen must be protected, sometimes we witness cases where power and corruption can manipulate everything. Today's story, about Anna's fight to protect the bridge that connects her sister's house to the community, is not just a simple confrontation between an individual and an organization. It's a battle full of sweat, tears, and justice against systemic corruption. When Anna started building the small bridge for her sister, she never imagined that such a simple yet meaningful act would lead her to face an entire network of power within the HOA and Pine Harbor development. The unreasonable demands, strict regulations, and shady schemes of the powerful individuals led her life into a deadlock. But could Anna win this battle? Stay tuned for this gripping and intense story, where justice will ultimately be brought to light after merciless battles of wit and strength. Can Anna keep the bridge for her sister and expose the corruption within the community? And if you are following this story, don't hesitate to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. What do you think about what Anna has done and the actions of the HOA? Will justice truly be served in battles like this? Watch until the end of the story to discover the outcome of the fight between good and evil in our society. You definitely won't want to miss a single moment of this thrilling and surprising story. That morning, as usual, I was sitting in the garden, one hand holding a hot cup of tea, the other gently stroking the wilted leaf of the rosemary plant in the garden. The scene was peaceful, the space blending into the crisp chill of the morning. But then, a sudden shadow appeared beneath the window, the bright yellow envelope. I immediately recognized it as a letter from the HOA. This was no ordinary letter. It was an official notice, demanding that I remove the wooden bridge I had built 9 months ago. This bridge, though small, was the only connection between me and my sister, Maya, who was battling terminal cancer. It felt like a heavy punch to the stomach. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. The words danced in front of my eyes. Unauthorized structure. Must be removed within 30 days. The bridge, a structure I had spent months building, was now being considered a violation of HOA regulations. They not only demanded I tear down the bridge, but also fined me $500 a day if I failed to comply. At that moment, it wasn't anger, but disbelief. I sank down on the porch steps, feeling as if all my strength had left me. This was the only bridge that allowed me to reach Maya, my sister, who was fighting a ruthless cancer. Every time she had chemotherapy, I relied on that bridge to bring her medicine, food, and sometimes just a hug to ease her pain. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed everything. I couldn't believe this was happening, couldn't understand why the HOA would make this request when the bridge was on my private land, not violating any common property regulations. How many times, during stormy days, I had to cycle for 45 minutes just to reach Maya's house. In those moments, the bridge was a lifeline. Every moment with her, I felt hope and strength. This bridge was Maya's lifeline. When she needed me the most, I could be there in an instant. But now, somehow, those in the HOA could make such a decision, all for a trivial regulation. The feeling of helplessness and despair rose within me. What was I supposed to do? Maya, my sister, was the strongest person I knew. All my life, she had been a role model for me. I remember when I was young, she taught me everything about resilience and patience. However, terminal cancer had begun to take a brutal toll on her body. She still tried to face each day, knowing that her time was limited. In the past, Maya and I had overcome so many hardships together, but now, I was the one who had to help her face the storms of life. The small island where she lived, Maya's Island, had been our family's home for 3 generations. And now, I received a notice demanding the removal of the bridge I had built. Just imagining the thought of not being able to care for her when she needed me, my heart ached even more. That bridge, though just a small structure, was the only link between me and her. Without it, I couldn't reach her when the storms or harsh winters came. This bridge was not just a simple object. It was a symbol of love, the bridge I had poured my heart into building, with just one purpose: to help my sister get through her toughest days. The bridge was where I could rush out every time I received an urgent call from her. Those were the most important moments, deciding whether she could continue fighting the disease. But now, the existence of that bridge was threatened by the unreasonable regulations of an organization I once thought would protect my rights. But no, this was the beginning of a battle I had never anticipated. I could not sit idly by anymore. After days of calling Karen, the HOA president, and always receiving the answer, "We'll get back to you," I decided to attend the HOA meeting that evening. It was an important meeting I could not miss. The bridge I built for my sister Maya was not just a structure, it was the very lifeline for her, and I would not let those cold regulations take away the opportunity to help her. Arriving at the 7 p.m. meeting at the community center, my heart raced more than ever. The hall was filled with curious eyes, but as I entered, no one expected how tense this battle would be. The community members sat silently, waiting, all attention focused on Karen, who was sitting at the head of the table, holding a sheet of notes, not even looking up when I entered. Karen was no stranger to me. She was the HOA president, and I had met her a few times before, but I had never seen her so cold and determined. As I stepped up to the podium, she remained seated, holding tightly to her papers without ever looking up. Looking at her, I could feel the indifference clearly present in her eyes and gestures. The whole room went silent. No one said anything. I decided not to hesitate any longer and walked straight up to the podium, standing there. "Karen," I began, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. "I'm here because of the bridge I built for my sister. It's not just a construction, but a lifeline for my sister, who is fighting terminal cancer." Karen smirked slightly, not even lifting her head from her papers. "Anna, I understand your reasons, but we've repeatedly said that this bridge was not approved properly. This is a legal matter. Rules are rules, and there are no exceptions. But my sister is dying." I couldn't hold back, my voice suddenly rising. "This bridge is the reason I can care for her. It's the only way I can reach her when she needs me most. Without it, I can't make it in time. If I can't help her, would you take responsibility?" Karen still didn't look at me, her voice as cold as ice. "Anna, personal circumstances don't change HOA regulations. You can appeal, but we have made our decision. The bridge must be removed within 30 days. I felt a lump in my throat. "So, you're giving me and my sister a slow death, aren't you? Do you realize that only this bridge allows me to bring her medicine in time? She can't move, and you want me to travel a 45-minute route while she's fighting cancer?" Karen finally looked up at me, her eyes cold, showing no empathy. "We have clear regulations. The bridge violates the HOA's building laws. You can sue, but we cannot be forced to ignore regulations." A surge of anger rose within me, but I couldn't let my emotions control me. "Don't you understand? This bridge isn't a legal issue, it's a human one. My sister needs me. You are destroying the life of someone who is dying, and you're sitting here talking about ridiculous regulations." One of the HOA board members, Mr. John, sitting next to Karen, spoke up, trying to ease the situation. "I think we should reconsider. We can't just look at the regulations and ignore the reality. This bridge poses no danger to the community." Karen turned to look at Mr. John with dissatisfaction, but she didn't respond. After a few seconds of silence, she continued, "The decision is up to the board, and I have made it." The room fell silent, and a tense quietness spread throughout. I stood there, filled with anger and disappointment. The feeling of being abandoned by those who should have protected my rights and my sister's was a painful shock. I took a deep breath, looking at the others in the room. "If you think I will give up, you're wrong. I won't let these rules destroy my sister." A few members of the board looked at each other, silent, but I could feel the uncertainty in their eyes. They had never been in my shoes. They didn't know what it felt like to watch a loved one fight a disease with no way to help. March 15th, 2024. After the tense meeting with Karen and the HOA board, although I still couldn't believe they could defend such unreasonable rules, I decided not to give up. I started investigating on my own, trying to figure out why the HOA was so insistent on having me remove the bridge. But the deeper I dug, the more the questions in my head became blurry and full of suspicion. These events couldn't just be a result of HOA's rigid rules. One morning after the meeting, I decided to visit the Pine Harbor Development Office. Why did this company keep sending offers to buy land around the Pinewood Lake area, especially the area where my sister, Maya, lived? I noticed that they had been purchasing several properties in the area, but something felt off. How could they know that my sister and I were facing a major legal issue without inside information? I drove to the Pine Harbor office and asked to meet with one of the employees. They weren't pleased to see me, but I couldn't back down. After a brief standoff, a man in a black suit, Martin Green, came out and said, "Anna, I understand you're looking into something, but we can't share information about our projects. However, I'll leave a business card if you'd like to discuss selling your land further." I felt like I had uncovered a clue. Pine Harbor wasn't just a real estate company. It was the nucleus of a larger plan being carried out under the guise of political deals. Back home, I decided to continue my investigation. The signs became clearer as I paid closer attention to conversations within the HOA, especially with Karen. I recalled a previous meeting where I questioned her about tearing down the bridge, and she casually said, "We're just enforcing the HOA regulations, Anna." At that time, I thought nothing of it, but now I realized it wasn't just a simple answer. It seemed like she was protecting someone, not for the benefit of the community, but for the personal gain of a small group. I started to track meetings between Karen and the HOA members, and I soon noticed a very close connection. Karen wasn't just working with people in the community, but also maintaining ties with Pine Harbor Development. There was even a time when I saw her dining with some of the company's executives at an upscale restaurant. I couldn't help but think that forcing me to tear down the bridge might be part of a larger plan that Pine Harbor was pursuing. One afternoon, when I visited a nearby neighbor, I overheard a conversation between Derek, who always worked with the HOA, and another man I had never met. Derek said, "Make sure to put pressure on her, otherwise, she won't sell. The bridge is just a way to force her." That comment sent chills down my spine. Everything happening with the bridge and the demands from the HOA was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed to dig deeper. A week later, I spent the entire day going through public records and documents related to Pine Harbor Development. After hours of searching, I uncovered something chilling. Pine Harbor was involved in shady dealings with local politicians, including the mayor, who frequently attended HOA meetings. This explained why Karen always seemed indifferent and unaffected by my personal situation. She probably didn't worry about these decisions because she had the support of powerful people. Furthermore, I discovered that Pine Harbor was planning to build a luxury resort right in this area, including the land where my sister's house stood. If they could acquire my sister's property, they would be able to build a massive resort without any obstacles. Maya's property was one of the final pieces they needed to complete this project. I found documents showing that Pine Harbor had been reaching out to landowners in the area, offering significantly higher prices to buy their properties, but they also didn't hesitate to use coercive tactics to force people to sell. These dealings were documented in emails between Pine Harbor executives and local government officials. One afternoon, I received a call from an anonymous source. The voice on the phone trembled as it said, "I know you're looking into Pine Harbor. Be careful. They've dealt with people who've opposed them before. Your bridge is a thorn in their side." This information felt like a veil of secrecy being lifted. I couldn't believe that those I thought would protect my rights were actually working with Pine Harbor to force my family and others to sell their land for their project. March 22, 2024. Less than a week after discovering the connection between Pine Harbor Development, Karen, and local officials, I received an unexpected call. The deep voice on the other end introduced himself as someone I didn't know. "Hello, Anna. I'm Martin Green from Pine Harbor Development. I hope you're doing well." His voice sounded too polite and smooth, making me feel uncomfortable. But I tried to stay calm. "Hello, Martin. How can I help you?" "I wanted to talk about the land you own near Pinewood Lake. Pine Harbor is very interested in developing this area, and I believe we can find a solution that benefits both of us." I sighed, the uneasy feeling growing within me. I knew this company wasn't here to help me. "I have no intention of selling my land, Martin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I don't think I need any solution from Pine Harbor." There was silence for a moment, as if he was considering how to convince me. Then his voice came back, softer, as if trying to make me feel at ease. "I understand. However, we can offer you a very attractive price for your land." We'll pay much higher than market value, Martin said, his voice smooth but firm, as if everything had already been planned. We'll also handle the HOA issue and ensure everything goes smoothly. You won't have to worry about the bridge anymore. I stopped, my heart racing. They wanted to buy my house and land, and not just that. They were promising to solve the HOA issue, which meant they knew about the bridge, about the fight I was going through. They were cornering me, forcing me to choose between keeping my family's home or selling it to end it all. But I couldn't fall into this trap easily. My family's land had been here for 3 generations, and my sister, Maya, grew up here. This was our home, where my family had lived for a lifetime. How could I give it up? I'm not selling my land, Martin. Not for any price. I replied firmly, even though the feeling of being threatened continued to rise. Maya and I will never leave. We have a right to live here. Martin was silent for a moment, as if reconsidering his approach. Then he continued, his tone a little more tense. I just want you to think it over, Anna. Don't let the HOA rules ruin your life. You could get a fair price and move somewhere better. His tone grew softer, but I heard the coercion in his words. They didn't think I would refuse. They saw me as an obstacle to be removed. I felt threatened. They weren't just attacking my property. They were threatening the peace of my sister's life. How could I leave the house my family had built over the years? The bridge I had built was just one part of what I had worked so hard to protect for my family. I won't sell, Martin. I repeated, my voice more resolute. Thank you for the offer, but I won't let them take this house. Martin didn't respond immediately. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice tinged with both disappointment and implication. You won't regret it, Anna. I hope you don't have to face greater troubles. Then he hung up. I sat there, still feeling a lump in my throat. Even though I had refused the offer, I knew I was now in an unavoidable battle. Pine Harbor didn't just want my land, they wanted everything. And I knew that if I didn't fight, my family would be pushed out, and everything I had worked for would be lost forever. April 2nd, 2024. After the call from Martin Green and the heavy-handed offer from Pine Harbor Development, I couldn't stop thinking about the fight I was now in. I felt like I wasn't just defending the bridge and my family's home. I was facing a bigger conspiracy that I hadn't yet fully grasped. I began to suspect that the demand to tear down the bridge was just a part of a larger plan to seize our land. I couldn't let this continue, so I decided to dig deeper into what was really going on. I didn't just want to protect the bridge. I needed to expose everything, uncover the hidden connections between Pine Harbor, the HOA, and the powerful politicians behind it. I began sifting through public documents, looking for any irregularities in land deals, HOA meetings, and information about the people in power in the community. After days of relentless work, I discovered something horrifying. I found a series of emails and financial reports that I was lucky enough to gather from anonymous sources. These documents clearly showed that Pine Harbor Development was involved in shady dealings with HOA leaders, including Karen, who frequently worked with local government officials. They weren't just trying to buy land from residents at low prices. They were also manipulating land values and forcing people out of the area to build a luxury resort. In an email between Pine Harbor executives, I found information that they had discussed forcing landowners who refused to sell by exploiting HOA regulations. My bridge was not a random issue. Pine Harbor knew I wouldn't agree to sell, and they had used the HOA as a tool to pressure me. This became even clearer when I discovered that some Pine Harbor employees had reached out to local government officials to change regulations, allowing them to easily acquire land and begin building a luxury resort without any obstacles. This explained why I always felt the HOA was only protecting the interests of a few people, not the community, but instead promoting illegal projects. Every day, I uncovered another part of this larger picture, and it felt like I was being pulled into a struggle not just for land, but for justice. However, I knew I couldn't face this power alone. What I needed now were the right pieces of evidence and help from those who could bring the truth to light. As the truth slowly emerged, I realized I couldn't handle Pine Harbor and these connections by myself. I reached out to an old friend, James Wilson, a former FBI investigator now working in law. I shared with him everything I had uncovered, and he immediately recognized that this was much bigger than I had imagined. Anna, this is not a simple matter, James said over the phone. What you're facing could involve corruption, fraud, and money laundering. I advise you to contact the FBI immediately. We can help you. Without hesitation, I reached out to the FBI. Within a day, Agent Torres called me. He asked for details about what I had discovered, and I provided all the materials I had gathered. He agreed this was a serious case and requested I cooperate closely with them for further investigation. "We need all the evidence you have, Anna. What you've uncovered is critical," Agent Torres said. "If Pine Harbor is truly involved in these illegal activities, we can stop them before they do something even more dangerous." The next day, the FBI launched their investigation. Agents arrived on site to gather evidence and interview people in the community. They requested local agencies provide more information on real estate transactions and the relationships between the government and Pine Harbor. Meanwhile, I continued gathering critical information from other anonymous sources, providing everything I had to the FBI to ensure all the evidence would come to light. April 10, 2024. After the FBI began their investigation, it felt like I had entered a giant chess game, with the pieces not always clearly visible. Agents, led by Agent Torres, worked tirelessly to gather more evidence about the illegal activities of Pine Harbor Development and the HOA. They quickly got to work, collecting documents from HOA meetings, interviewing witnesses, and requesting information from local agencies about real estate transactions related to Karen and Pine Harbor. Each day, I received new reports from the FBI, and all the information they provided only made me more shocked. Not only were there shady transactions, but there were also clear signs of political manipulation, bribery, and money laundering. Emails, financial documents, and even secret call recordings from Pine Harbor proved that this company had colluded with Karen and several local government officials to buy land at a fraction of the cost, manipulate zoning decisions, and build a luxury resort. What surprised me the most were the secret meetings between Karen and Pine Harbor executives, financial exchanges that I never could have imagined. The FBI began collecting evidence and verifying all these details, but the story didn't stop there. One late morning, I received a call from Agent Torres. His voice was slightly tense. "Anna, we need your help with something." "What's going on?" I asked, feeling a rising sense of tension. "We have enough evidence to start taking action, but we need to create a surprise scenario to catch them in the act of committing a crime," Torres continued. "We're going to conduct a public investigation next week, and we need you to participate to expose the illegal relationship between Karen and Pine Harbor in front of the community." Although I felt uneasy about this situation, I knew it was an opportunity for the FBI to expose everything Karen and Pine Harbor had been doing in the shadows. I agreed to participate and promised to support them fully. The investigation began on April 15, 2024, during the HOA meeting. I knew this time would be different from the previous ones. Karen and the HOA members had no idea that the FBI had been tracking their every move during this time. This would be the moment they had to face everything they had hidden. I walked into the meeting room, and immediately, I could sense the tension in the air. Karen was sitting in the center, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at me skeptically. The HOA board members remained indifferent, as if they were ready to make decisions based on their own agenda. But this time, I didn't feel helpless. I knew the truth would be revealed. When the meeting started, Karen opened with her usual lines. "We are here to discuss the issues that need to be resolved in the community." She presented a list of violations that the HOA had identified and began with issues that seemed trivial. But I could clearly feel that these were not the only reasons I was there. Throughout the meeting, I noticed some unusual signs from the people in the room. They exchanged nervous glances, especially when Karen received a text message on her phone, which she quickly read and then hid away. I couldn't help but think they were anxious about what was about to happen. In the middle of the meeting, Agent Torres and the FBI team arrived, accompanied by several police officers. Suddenly, one of the FBI agents stood up, walked toward Karen, and asked her to stand. "Karen Mitchell, we have a search warrant and an arrest warrant for you, charged with corruption, fraud, and illegal building violations related to Pine Harbor Development," Torres declared in a firm voice. The entire room went silent. The faces of the HOA members, including Derek, Sophia, and others, were stunned, as if they couldn't believe what was happening. Karen didn't immediately react. She stood there, her face devoid of emotion, but her hands were trembling with fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen shouted, trying to resist. "This is an unjust attack. I haven't done anything wrong. Torres remained unshaken, continuing, "We have gathered enough evidence, and now it's time for the truth to come out." Soon after, the FBI agents began arresting Karen and several other HOA members. As they led Karen outside, I felt like a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The bridge I had fought to protect was no longer just a physical structure, but had become a symbol of justice prevailing. Things were beginning to clear up, and I could feel we were approaching a major turning point in this struggle. April 20th, 2024. Finally, after weeks of investigation and the shocks I had faced, the FBI publicly released evidence of the widespread corruption involving Karen and the HOA members. But this wasn't the end. The entire community, who had suffered under the manipulation and oppression of the HOA's wrongful decisions, needed to know the truth. They needed to see that we were fighting for justice, not just for a bridge, but for the integrity of the community. I decided to hold a community meeting. After contacting the neighbors I had built relationships with, I invited them to the community center that evening to share important information and hold an open discussion about what had happened. The entire community needed to know what Karen, Pine Harbor, and some of the HOA leaders had done. That evening, the community center was packed. People, from large families to those living alone, came to attend the meeting. The atmosphere was tense, but also filled with anticipation. Karen was no longer the only one with power in the room. I stood up, holding the mic, and began to share my story. What I said wasn't just about a bridge, but about a larger struggle for transparency and justice in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm not just here to talk about the bridge I built for my sister. I'm here to share the truth about what's been happening in our community. I began. We've been deceived by those in power in this community, people we trusted. They have manipulated the regulations, broken the law, and done all of this for their own benefit. I continued telling the story of my investigation about the shady dealings between Karen and Pine Harbor Development, the illegal transactions I had witnessed, and the information I received from the FBI. They tried to force me to sell my family's land, just because they wanted to build a resort. But I can't let them take what has been in my family for 3 generations. I continued, looking at the faces in the crowd. We are not just fighting for the bridge. We are fighting for fairness for all of us. As I finished my speech, a silence enveloped the room. Then, Sophia, a young mother who lived near me, stood up and spoke. I know exactly what she's talking about. The HOA forced me to tear down my kid's playset just because it was too visible from the lake. But they did nothing when Derek parked his huge boat right on the road. This isn't the first time they've done this, but they never listened to us. Other neighbors stood up one by one, sharing their own stories of violations they had faced with the HOA. Homes forced to dismantle awnings, gardens fined for not adhering to landscaping rules, and the unreasonable demands they had to endure. Marcus, an older man who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, stood up and said, "I've been here for over 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The HOA has definitely been protecting the interests of a few people. We can't let them keep doing this." The community began sharing their own stories, and the atmosphere in the room became more tense than ever. These stories were not isolated examples. They were clear evidence of manipulation and abuse of power. As people began to realize that the truth I was bringing to light was not just about me, but about all of them, support started to rise. The entire community began to stand up, showing their resolve and fighting against the injustices we had all been suffering. The next day, some of my neighbors and I decided to launch an information campaign. We began handing out flyers, sending emails to everyone in the community, and sharing the documents, emails, and evidence we had gathered from the FBI and our investigations. Our goal was not just to expose the corruption of the HOA and Pine Harbor, but to help everyone understand what we were up against. We organized more community meetings, inviting people to join discussions and work together to come up with an action plan. We also reached out to local reporters, sharing our story with the public and calling for support from community rights organizations. These events marked a crucial turning point in the fight against Karen and Pine Harbor. The community no longer stood silently, but had united to face the manipulation of those in power. The bridge, which I had fought so hard to protect, had now become a symbol of the community's struggle. April 25th, 2024. After weeks of intense investigation and meticulous preparation by the FBI, the day we had been waiting for finally arrived. Agent Torres and his team were ready to carry out raids at Karen's house and the homes of key HOA members. This was a major turning point in the fight, not just for me, but for the whole community. But before it happened, I felt nervous. Would everything go as planned? Would Karen and the HOA members be able to deny their crimes? We had gathered enough evidence, but the most important thing now was to prove the truth to everyone. That morning, as I was preparing for the next community meeting at home, I received a call from Agent Torres. He didn't waste any time, simply announcing that they had begun. "Don't worry, Anna. We're on the ground. Just wait for the results," Torres said, his voice full of confidence, but also a hint of tension. A few hours later, I received messages and calls from neighbors and friends in the community, notifying me that the FBI and police had arrived at Karen's house. The black FBI vehicles were parked in front of her home, and the special forces began moving in to execute the arrest warrant. The scene was unbelievable. Karen, who had once been the one with power and control over everything in the community, was now facing serious charges. People in the neighborhood, who had once been intimidated by Karen, now stood outside her house, watching the event unfold, their faces filled with curiosity and anxiety. When Karen was arrested, her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of protesting or screaming, she just stood silently, her hands hanging limp, and her lips tightly pressed together. Karen couldn't deny it anymore, as the FBI had enough evidence to conclude that she had manipulated HOA decisions, laundered money, and engaged in corrupt activities related to Pine Harbor's land deals. As the police placed the handcuffs on her, Karen let out a quiet sigh, as if she had known this outcome for a long time. She glanced at me once, her eyes no longer filled with arrogance. Her eyes were empty, devoid of resistance, only acceptance. She understood that it was all over now. Her schemes had been exposed. And I didn't do anything wrong. I only did what I thought was best for this community, Karen said, her voice a weak justification. But I no longer felt any sympathy. I had witnessed too much suffering from Karen and Pine Harbor's abuse of power, not just with me, but with everyone else in the area. I replied, my voice resolute. You didn't do anything wrong. You deceived all of us. You ruined the lives of people in this community for your own benefit. Today, justice has come. And then, Karen was led out of the house, right in front of her neighbors. She could no longer hide her defeat. The secrets had been revealed, and the community finally knew the truth. After the arrest, the FBI continued their investigation, carrying out searches at other locations tied to Pine Harbor development. The illegal connections between Karen, HOA members, and Pine Harbor were slowly brought to the public's attention. The FBI gathered more crucial documents proving that Karen and the HOA's decisions had never been for the benefit of the community, but to serve their own personal profit and Pine Harbor's illegal project. Anna's fight had finally come to an end as the crimes of Karen and the HOA members were completely exposed. After days of relentless struggle, Anna not only protected the bridge that was crucial for her sister, but also brought justice to the entire community. The bridge was not just a physical structure, but a symbol of resilience, a fight against corruption and the abuse of power. And in that final moment, justice was served. But more importantly, what Anna had protected were the values of family, community, and righteousness. Each one of us may face challenges, but if we stand together, we can change everything. No matter how large corruption may be, it can never escape the light of truth. Karen and the power brokers will have to face the consequences of their actions. And if you find this story inspiring and want to continue following exciting legal battles and justice-driven stories, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, HOA Karen Files. Here, we'll continue to bring you stories of justice, thrilling cases, and truths you cannot miss. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an exciting video. Join us on this journey as we explore and confront the important issues in society. Thank you for watching and always supporting HOA Karen Files. Please continue to share your thoughts about this story in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. HOA Karen finds black young man $500 for hanging an American flag and the unexpected outcome. Hello everyone, and thank you for visiting the HOA Karen Files channel. Today, we will explore a story full of hidden truths and injustices, a story not just about power or neighborhood regulations. This is the story of Karen, a homeowners association, HOA, president who seems to have power in her hands, but hides actions of racial discrimination, smuggling, and abusing her power to manipulate the community around her. In this story, Malik, a black former firefighter, faces unreasonable demands, unjust fines, and a power system Karen created to strip innocent residents of their rights. But behind this battle, it's not just about Malik protecting his home. It's a fight for justice, equality, and mutual respect in a challenging society. This story goes beyond racial discrimination and expands to big questions about the abuse of power and how we can stand up when facing ruthless forces in society. With the help of a private investigator, the dark secrets about Karen are gradually revealed, from perfume smuggling to shady real estate deals. So, what happens when justice is served? Follow this surprising and intense story until the very last moment. You won't want to miss any of the twists. And we would love to hear your thoughts and opinions about this story. Leave a comment below this video. What do you think of Karen's actions? How can we prevent such behavior in society? This story may open up big discussions, and we look forward to hearing your perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the exciting and meaningful stories coming up. Watch this story to the end, and let's dive into the legal, political, and human consequences of Malik and Karen's tale. My name is Malik, 32 years old. My father is American, and my mother is Jamaican. After 10 years serving as a firefighter in Chicago, I decided to leave my job and find a new direction. The reason is simple but profound. Firefighting took away too much of my time and energy. I felt I needed to find a quiet space where I could rebuild myself and start over. In July 2024, I decided to move to Sunville, a peaceful neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, hoping to rebuild my life. Sunville wasn't where I planned to stay long-term, but I thought it was a place where I could start a new chapter, free from the stress of my former job. With the savings from my years as a firefighter, I bought a small house worth $350,000, hoping the quiet surroundings would give me the motivation to change my life. When I first moved in, everything seemed to go smoothly. The neighbors here were all very friendly, enthusiastically helping me move in and inviting me to join community activities. Outdoor parties and HOA meetings were held regularly, and I felt like I was truly part of a community. At that time, I thought my new life would be a fresh, uncomplicated, and peaceful start. However, things began to change when I met Karen, the president of the HOA. Karen was someone you wouldn't easily forget. From the first time I met her, I felt something was off. The other neighbors were all very friendly and approachable, but Karen was different. She seemed stern, always ready to criticize anything she thought was inappropriate. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe she was just someone who took her job seriously. One morning, while I was tending to the lawn in front of my house, Karen appeared. She walked out of her large house, her crisp white blouse pressed neatly, and her high heels made a distinct sound on the pavement. She stopped right in front of me, and I could feel her attention fixed on me. "Hello, I'm Karen, the HOA president. And you are?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with an unsettling suspicion. "I'm Malik, just moved in here. Thanks for welcoming me." I smiled lightly, trying to maintain a friendly tone, though I could sense something was wrong in the air. Karen stared at me for a moment, then softly spoke. "Oh, I remember you now. You're the new guy, right? I must say, this is quite a special neighborhood. We're very particular about maintaining the value of the community. And the HOA regulations, we're very strict about making sure everything is appropriate." Her words, though soft, carried a sharp undertone, as if she was implying something that I couldn't immediately understand. Appropriate. That was the term she used so often, as though I were part of something that didn't quite fit into the perfect picture she was creating. "Oh, I understand," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I respect the regulations here." Karen nodded, but her gaze never left me. An awkward silence enveloped the conversation. "You're the only black person in this neighborhood, aren't you?" Karen suddenly asked, which caught me off guard. Her question seemed to be thrown out casually, but I felt it was a deliberate observation. I just smiled lightly, trying not to let my emotions show. "Yes, that's right. But I believe this neighborhood can be a wonderful place for everyone, regardless of race or background." Karen looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing my words. Right, she said, her tone seeming more cautious. Just remember that everything here has to adhere to the standards we've set. And I hope you won't have any trouble adjusting to everything around here. I was sure I had picked up the deeper meaning in her words. Everything around here. Was she implying me, the only black person in this neighborhood? The discomfort began to rise in me, but I just nodded and replied, "Thank you for the reminder. I will be mindful." Karen turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling as though I had just been judged in a strange way. She didn't say anything more, just walked off, and I realized that the peaceful life I had sought might not be as easy as I had hoped. After a few weeks living in Sunville, I began to settle into the rhythm of the neighborhood. On weekends, I often spent time improving the small garden in front of my house, creating a cozy space that suited my tastes. One beautiful morning, I decided to hang an American flag on my front door, a simple act, but one full of meaning to me. The American flag was not only a symbol of the country I loved, but also a way to express my pride in the place I lived. I thought it was something a regular citizen would do. Little did I know, that simple act would lead to a complicated issue. The very next day, I received a letter from the HOA, signed by Karen. Contrary to the friendliness I had expected from the neighborhood, the letter felt like a cold splash of water. It stated that I had violated one of the HOA regulations. Specifically, I had disrupted the aesthetic of the neighborhood by hanging an American flag on my door. They required me to take the flag down within 48 hours and, as a penalty, I was fined $500 for violating the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. I was stunned when I read the letter. $500? For a flag? I couldn't understand why such a simple act could be considered disruptive. My initial reaction wasn't anger, but surprise and disbelief. How could a flag cause such controversy? I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. How could there be a rule about hanging flags when other decorations were freely displayed in the neighborhood without any complaints? The first question that popped into my head was, could the fact that I was the only black person in the neighborhood be the reason Karen reacted so strongly? Karen looked at me sharply, as if she was guessing what I would say next. I understand, but rules are rules. If you disagree, I will have to continue enforcing them. The conversation ended quickly. I walked away feeling powerless, unable to change anything. The feeling I had at that moment was hard to describe. Part of me felt I couldn't endure this injustice any longer, but another part held on to the belief that the only choice was to continue being patient. This feeling wasn't just anger at being fined for such a ridiculous reason. It was the first moment I truly realized that the racial discrimination I had heard about could exist even in neighborhoods that seemed safe and peaceful. After the incident with the American flag, I thought everything would calm down and I could continue living peacefully in Sunville. But I was wrong. Karen didn't stop there. The following week, I received another letter from Karen, this time about a serious issue she felt needed immediate resolution. It was about the gate at my house. She wrote that my gate didn't fit the style of the neighborhood and demanded I replace it within 30 days, or I would be fined $1,000. The reason Karen gave was absurd. Your gate looks too simple and lacks sophistication. I was stunned when I read those words. My gate wasn't anything special. It was just a black metal gate, sturdy and aesthetically simple, with no issues at all. It looked exactly like the gates in the rest of the neighborhood. I distinctly remember when I chose this gate. I had consulted a few neighbors, and none of them complained about it. Yet Karen thought my gate was not elegant enough and demanded that I replace it. I couldn't help but feel that every action she took was aimed at me. Karen wasn't just finding reasons to make things difficult for me. She was also trying to assert her power in the neighborhood. Each time I received unreasonable demands from Karen, I felt the injustice grow more and more apparent. Was she trying to force me out of this neighborhood? I couldn't help but wonder. It wasn't just about the unreasonable HOA rules anymore, but also about her relentless effort to impose standards that I felt were completely foreign and unjust. A week later, I decided to confront Karen, not to apologize or explain, but to face her directly. I knew I couldn't continue living in constant fear of inspections and unreasonable demands. When I entered Karen's house, she was sitting in the living room, still wearing her thin glasses, and the light shining on her face made her look even colder. She stared at me indifferently, but I knew right away that I could no longer avoid this. "Hello, Karen," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want to talk about the request to replace my gate." I don't understand why it's an issue when it looks exactly like the gates of other houses in this neighborhood. Karen took a deep breath, placed her notebook down on the table, and responded with an emotionless tone. Malik, I've explained this. The HOA rules are that everything must fit the neighborhood style, and your gate doesn't fit. This isn't a personal matter, but a community-wide issue. I couldn't help but feel the sarcasm in her words. So, according to you, I have to replace it for what reason? I don't see any difference between my gate and those of other houses. Karen stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside for a moment before turning back to face me. Some things can't be explained with simple logic, Malik. We have to maintain consistency, harmony in the neighborhood. A gate too simple could lower the overall value of this neighborhood. Her response made me even more frustrated. So, the harmony of this neighborhood means everything has to be the same, right? Regardless of whether it's really necessary. Karen looked at me for a moment, then responded firmly. Yes, Malik. This community needs to be consistent. If you can't accept that, you may need to think about living elsewhere. Her words felt like a cold splash of water hitting me. For the first time, I clearly realized that she wasn't just enforcing these rules to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic, but was actually trying to force me out. Everything started to become clearer, and I could no longer keep my eyes closed. From then on, Karen's actions became more and more stringent. I received letters about other minor issues, from demanding I adjust the outdoor lights because the brightness was too much, to forcing me to trim the trees in my garden because they didn't meet the required size. Every time, I felt that Karen was finding ways to make things difficult for me. Every small issue became a big problem, and I began to realize that it wasn't just about the HOA regulations, but the subtle racial discrimination that was influencing the way she treated me. After weeks of continuous harassment from Karen, I felt I couldn't take it anymore. Unreasonable demands kept coming, from fines for vague reasons to reminders about things I didn't feel violated any rules. Every time I received a letter from the HOA, I felt like I was playing a ridiculous game of cat and mouse, and every time I faced Karen, I felt cornered. I began to wonder if I was her target just because I was the only black person in the neighborhood. I couldn't continue living with this fear and sense of oppression. At some point, I realized that if I wanted to find out the real reason behind Karen's actions, I needed to investigate more about her. I couldn't just wait for more vague letters and tense encounters. I decided to start looking into Karen, not through direct dialogue or HOA meetings, but by finding out what she was actually doing in this neighborhood. I began seeking input from the community. I attended HOA meetings, listened to other people's stories, and didn't hesitate to share my own. Not long after, I posted a message on Instagram where I shared the difficulties I was facing. I wrote about the fines for unjust reasons and how Karen kept making unreasonable demands that seemed to be targeting only me. I wrote in detail and transparently, hoping that the community would understand and help me find the truth behind it all. In the post, I didn't forget to ask a big question. Am I the target just because I'm the only black person in this neighborhood? Within just a few hours, my post attracted attention. Comments started pouring in, not only from neighbors, but from many people in the online community. Some people sympathized with me, sharing the issues they faced when dealing with Karen and the HOA. But there were also a few people who thought I was exaggerating, suggesting that I should just follow the HOA rules and not make a big deal out of it. Still, one particular comment caught my attention. It was from someone named Elijah. He wrote that he was a private investigator and lived in the nearby area. I'm really sorry to hear what you've been going through. If you need help, I'm willing to assist without charge. I'll help you investigate Karen and what she's been doing, Elijah wrote in his comment. I felt a flicker of hope. After months of fighting alone, I could now find help from someone professional. I read through Elijah's profile and saw that he had experience in investigating complicated issues, and more importantly, he was also black, which made me feel more comfortable and willing to share. Immediately, I contacted Elijah through a message and shared the whole story. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near the neighborhood. When I met him, Elijah was a polite man with sharp eyes and a friendly smile. He listened as I told him about my encounters with Karen and my suspicion of racial discrimination behind her actions. Malik, I believe what you're saying isn't just a coincidence. I'll help you investigate, not just about Karen, but also about any relationships she might have with other parties in this neighborhood, Elijah said. his voice confident yet sincere. "And I won't need you to pay me. This is my job, and I want to help." Elijah's promise made me feel much lighter. After so many times being pushed around with no one to stand up for me, now I had someone who could truly support me in this fight. I was no longer alone in this struggle. Elijah started gathering information about Karen. He reached out to her former neighbors, learned about her past, and also investigated her connections to major real estate companies in the area. The first clues began to surface, and I felt even more certain that my suspicions about Karen were not unfounded. This evidence not only shocked me, but also made me feel like I had been exploited from the very beginning. This entire neighborhood could become a target for the real estate projects that Karen and Greenfield Properties were orchestrating. I began to realize that her continuous imposition of regulations and fines wasn't about protecting the neighborhood, but was an attempt to force residents, particularly people like me, to give up their homes. This was a calculated scheme, a plan she had prepared long ago. From the small pieces of evidence, the truth about Karen and her relationship with Greenfield Properties gradually became clearer. Elijah not only obtained contracts and related documents, but also discovered internal emails between Karen and the executives of this real estate company. In one of them, she wrote, "We need to speed up the project and not let obstacles like Malik stand in the way. We can handle this with HOA rules to make them feel like they have no other choice." The story I was living wasn't just a personal struggle with a tyrannical HOA president, but a part of a bigger conspiracy. I was just a pawn in the power and money game of Karen and Greenfield Properties. Her relationship with this company had been established for a long time, and I was just one of the victims of the urban development plan they were pursuing. But as Elijah continued the investigation, an unexpected discovery occurred. He happened upon the fact that Karen wasn't only involved in real estate transactions, but also had a past related to smuggling. A source provided Elijah with crucial information about strange deals Karen was making with partners both inside and outside the country. These transactions were not legal and seemed to involve perfume smuggling, a highly valuable item traded illegally through unofficial channels. This evidence not only surprised me, but also became a key turning point. Along with the real estate documents, Elijah now discovered that Karen was a systematic smuggler, and what she was doing in this neighborhood was not just an abuse of power, but part of a larger criminal network. From here, everything became clear. Karen's attempts to push residents out of the neighborhood were not just to serve real estate projects, but were also part of her larger plan, a plan involving illegal transactions and severe corruption. With Elijah's help, we gathered enough evidence to bring Karen to light. The confidential documents, emails, and contracts we obtained proved that Karen was not just an HOA president abusing her power, but also a perfume smuggler involved in illegal activities related to trafficking and transporting goods across borders. These deals might not have been limited to just her, but could involve a broader criminal network. Moreover, Karen's racial discrimination became increasingly obvious. She had imposed strict regulations on me, the only black person in the neighborhood, with the clear goal of driving me out, while trying to push me into an unbearable situation. The unreasonable demands and repeated fines specifically targeted me, showing that racial discrimination was a major factor in her actions. With all of this evidence in hand, I could no longer stay silent. I decided to take decisive action to protect my rights, and also to ensure that Karen wouldn't continue harming this community. Elijah and I filed a lawsuit against Karen, taking the case to court and calling for intervention from the authorities. But that wasn't all. I knew that only making the information public could truly change the situation. We decided not only to file the lawsuit, but also to publicize the case on social media to inform the community about Karen's wrongdoings. I posted a detailed message on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, along with the evidence we had gathered. My post quickly attracted attention from the online community. People began sharing and commenting, not only expressing their outrage, but also condemning Karen's racist actions and corruption. This information quickly spread, letting the public know that someone in a position of power like Karen could abuse their authority to serve personal interests and engage in criminal activities. The community began sending letters to the authorities, demanding a thorough investigation into her actions. Once the information about Karen's actions became public, everything quickly went beyond her control. The police and relevant authorities couldn't just sit back in the face of the clear evidence Elijah and I had gathered. Within a few days, the investigation team stepped in, and their investigation didn't just focus on the perfume smuggling, but also expanded to other criminal activities related to Karen. Experts and agencies involved in smuggling began tracing Karen's connections to her partners, and her criminal network was slowly exposed. Karen was arrested and faced a series of serious charges, from perfume smuggling, abuse of power as an HOA president, to racial discrimination and making life difficult for neighborhood residents, particularly Black people like me. The undeniable evidence of her criminal activities along with Greenfield properties and the documents related to illegal transactions made it impossible for her to escape legal scrutiny. Soon after Karen was arrested, the news spread rapidly, not only in the neighborhood but also on social media. The online community erupted with outrage, strongly condemning her racial discrimination. People couldn't believe that someone in such a powerful position could exploit their power to harm those around them, especially Black residents in her neighborhood. Posts about the case flooded Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and various other forums. Thousands of people expressed their anger and demanded strict action against Karen. Some even shared their own stories of being oppressed by Karen, showing that she didn't just discriminate against me, but against many others in the neighborhood. Karen's actions were no longer a personal matter, but had become a larger social issue, exposing a form of corruption many never expected. When the case came to light, Karen not only faced charges in the courtroom, but also endured harsh criticism from the public. On social media, no one hid their anger at her actions over the years. Images, videos, and stories of her forcing residents to sell their homes, the unreasonable fines, and the other absurd demands she had made were widely shared. Karen, who thought she could stand above it all, now had to face the exposure of all the crimes she had committed. And while the law would process her according to the regulations, the public backlash on social media and from society was much heavier. Her long-standing racial discrimination had led many to question the fairness of modern society. She wasn't just a criminal in the eyes of the law, but also a symbol of the injustice that many people have and are still enduring. After Karen was arrested and the truth about her actions was exposed, I felt a great sense of relief. However, I also realized that the fight for justice didn't just end with my personal victory, but was also a great lesson about the values we must uphold in society: fairness, mutual respect, and fighting against all forms of discrimination. Looking back on the months that passed, I understand that it wasn't just me, but many others in this neighborhood, especially Black people, who had endured the discrimination and oppression that Karen caused. But through this struggle, we found our collective voice. We stood up for what was right and didn't let injustice continue to prevail. And most importantly, we proved that justice will always prevail as long as we persist and never give up. My story isn't just about one person fighting against an abuser of power, but it's also about a community standing up together to protect human values. And I want this story to go beyond just this point. So, if you also believe we need to speak up against discrimination and defend justice, don't forget to subscribe to my HOA Karen Files channel. This is where I will continue sharing stories about important social issues, from racial discrimination cases to struggles to protect the rights of the oppressed. We can change this world, starting from small stories like this. Thank you for watching and standing with me in the fight for a fairer society. Let's continue to act together, and don't forget to share our story with everyone. Subscribe now and join the community of those who refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. Fake HOA cops kidnapped my wife, but didn't know she's CIA. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining the HOA Karen Files channel. Today, I'm about to tell you a story that's not only dramatic, but also reflects serious issues that not everyone realizes in their everyday lives. Have you ever wondered if your peaceful neighborhood could be hiding dark secrets? Could the seemingly harmless regulations of your HOA, Homeowners Association, be masking dangerous criminal schemes? This story will make you rethink what's really going on in your community. Imagine a quiet residential area with neat houses and friendly neighbors. In a place like this, everyone lives peacefully, following the rules and always helping each other. However, like all great stories, darkness always lurks beneath the surface. When an ordinary man, living in his neighborhood, discovers that his wife is not who he thought she was, but actually a CIA agent, an underground war begins. The story of how the Elmwood Gardens neighborhood was infiltrated and manipulated by an international criminal organization under the guise of the HOA will shock you. Let's explore how seemingly small HOA regulations, unreasonable fines, and unexpected inspections were actually tools used to carry out serious criminal schemes. In this story, you'll witness tense mind games, unexpected action scenes, and a shocking truth about the people we often consider ordinary in our community. But not only that, you'll see the power of community and unity when faced with deception and injustice. Before we dive into the story, I'd love for you to comment below and share your thoughts on what's happening. Have you ever thought that your community could be exploited like this? Could those small, insignificant rules in your neighborhood be hiding bigger issues? Leave your comments, and I'll be happy to read and discuss them with you. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this captivating story to the end. You won't want to miss the intense twists and surprises I'm about to tell. Let's see how a community stood up to face the truth and fought against imposters, protecting the true values of life. Don't forget to subscribe to the HOA Karen Files channel to follow upcoming stories. And now, let's start the journey of discovering the truth about Elmwood Gardens. My life with Sarah had been smooth for the past 8 years since we got married in the fall of 2017. Sarah and I met through a mutual friend, and from the first time we met, I knew she was special. She wasn't like the other women I had met before, simple, composed, with a gentle smile and a patience that I deeply appreciated. We both enjoyed a quiet life, sunny Sunday mornings with ginger lemon tea, and cozy dinners after a long day of work. We didn't have children. There were times we discussed it, but work and personal plans always delayed the decision. Sarah wasn't in a hurry about anything, which made me feel at ease because she never made any important decision hastily. We had been living in Elmwood Gardens for 3 years, and before this event occurred, I thought this neighborhood was the perfect place to build a long-term life, a peaceful place where we could find tranquility among the lush gardens and fresh air. Every day, Sarah and I had small routines that I believed were a perfect harmony in our married life. In the morning, I would take care of the garden while Sarah made ginger lemon tea, a habit that had become her specialty. She loved herbal teas, and ginger lemon tea was our favorite. After that, we'd sit outside on the porch, chatting about trivial things, the weather, the plants in the garden, or little neighborhood stories. It was the peaceful life I thought would last forever. One quiet Sunday, I sat in my favorite armchair, enjoying a rare moment of relaxation. Sarah sat on the porch, holding a cup of her usual ginger lemon tea. The scent of the tea blended with the gentle sunlight of the morning. We just sat there, in no rush, enjoying the peace that suburban life brought. I occasionally glanced at Sarah, seeing her smile gently before returning to the book she was reading. It was the perfect picture of a simple family life. We had shared moments like this for the past 3 years in Elmwood Gardens, a neighborhood where everything moved slowly and peacefully. But then, that peace was shattered suddenly and unexpectedly. The screech of tires broke the silence from the end of the alley. A black van with no license plates sped into our driveway at an alarming speed. The van skidded along the sidewalk before screeching to a halt right in front of our house. Before I could think, 3 men in tactical gear stepped out of the van, quickly advancing toward us. Each of them wore black outfits, equipped with tactical gear that looked like something out of an action movie, and they carried weapons. HOA compliance check, one of the men shouted, his voice deep and firm. The 3 of them immediately stepped onto the porch, not saying another word. I couldn't react fast enough, my eyes locked on their tactical vests and the guns hanging at their hips. Unbelievable. In a peaceful neighborhood like Elmwood Gardens, I never thought I'd witness something like this. I stayed frozen, unable to take my eyes off the scene. Sarah remained still, her gaze fixed straight ahead, showing no sign of fear. And then, before I could understand what was happening, one of the men lunged forward, pulling Sarah off the bench, forcefully, but not hurriedly. She didn't scream, didn't resist, she just looked at me calmly, then winked coldly. That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. It felt like everything around me was spinning. Sarah, my wife, who was always calm and cheerful, was being taken away without a word of protest. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't screaming like I imagined. She just looked at me as if this was part of a prearranged plan. A cold sensation ran down my spine, and then I realized I didn't really know my wife. Everything I thought was peaceful, a simple marriage, turned out to be a facade. I had never known Sarah's true past. From that moment on, everything became blurry and confusing, and I began to ask myself, who is my wife? And why was she being taken away so coldly? Panic and loss of control overwhelmed me as the black van disappeared from sight. My heart pounded. What had just happened was too sudden, too unexpected, and unbelievable. Sarah had been taken without a hint of resistance. I stood there, my hands trembling as I grabbed my phone, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. My eyes fixed on the bench where Sarah had just sat, where I could still see the remnants of what was left from the moment she last sat there. Her ginger lemon tea, a crumpled cushion, and the heavy silence hanging in the air. I dialed the police in a near panic. The calm voice of the female operator on the other end remained steady, but when I told her that Sarah had been kidnapped by people impersonating HOA police officers, her tone suddenly shifted. We've received reports about impersonators operating in your area. Don't do anything rash, stay at home. The police will arrive shortly. That's when I realized the situation was more than just a typical kidnapping. Impersonators? I muttered, sensing something far worse was waiting ahead. I couldn't stay still. My heart raced, and my hands started searching for something to calm the overwhelming panic. I ran inside, trying to pull myself together, but there was a strange compulsion urging me to keep searching. There was something I didn't know. Maybe I missed some sign. Something caught my attention, and then I saw it. A small hidden compartment in our office, behind a false wall, not easily noticeable. A strange control panel I had never seen before. I struggled to open it, feeling like I was breaking something important. When the drawer creaked open, I found a secure laptop, a phone unlike any I had ever seen, and a carefully written letter. My hands trembled as I opened the letter, the light from the desk lamp casting shadows on the black and white text. Sarah wrote, "If you're reading this letter, the worst has happened. Don't panic, but I've been taken for a reason you won't understand right now. I'm not who you think I am, and I certainly am not just your wife. I'm a CIA agent, involved in an undercover mission to investigate an international crime syndicate that the HOA in our neighborhood is involved with. What you've seen is not a coincidence. Everything happening is part of a larger plan that you can't know until it all comes to light. Karen and the people in the HOA, they're not just controlling our little lives, they're part of a much more complex network. I can't explain everything now, but trust me, everything is going according to plan. You will know everything when the time is right." The letter slipped from my hand. Sarah, my wife, wasn't just the simple woman I thought. She had been living a secret life right under my nose, and I never knew. Everything I thought was normal suddenly became an illusion. And what made me even more panicked was that, if everything Sarah wrote in that letter was true, I was just beginning a dangerous game I wasn't prepared for. The overwhelming feeling I had now was utter emptiness. The image of Sarah being dragged away, her look when she winked at me, it was all a signal from her, but I couldn't understand it at that moment. And now, as I read the letter, I realized I had been deceived, or rather, I had been living in an illusion, even while sharing this life with Sarah. I sat down heavily in the chair, my mind spinning after reading Sarah's letter. The entire world around me suddenly became hazy and confusing. Everything I had once thought was normal in my life now felt like a facade, a layer of camouflage for a dark secret I had been completely unaware of. Sarah, the wife I loved and trusted, turned out to be a CIA agent. Everything she did, everything she said, had a purpose, and I was just a part of her plan. I couldn't sit still anymore. A sense of panic and helplessness overwhelmed me. Sarah had kept a secret too large from me, and now I had to uncover the truth. At this moment, I was left with only one choice: to delve deeper into what Sarah had left behind for me. She had left behind a secure laptop, but I hesitated to open it right away. It felt like I was intruding into a world that didn't belong to me. But when the truth can no longer be hidden, I had no choice but to face it. I powered up the laptop, and as expected, it asked for a password. I tried a few fixed codes I thought might be Sarah's, but it didn't work. Then I remembered something Sarah had once said when we were watching a spy movie together. In this world, the most ordinary things can sometimes be the key to every secret. I tried entering the name of our pet cat, and strangely, it unlocked immediately. The laptop's control panel appeared, filled with a series of data files. I began to open each one, my eyes glued to the screen, not daring to blink. Among the files, I found surveillance images of the neighborhood, dense financial reports, and suspicious trips taken by Karen, the HOA president I thought was strict but harmless. These documents revealed a shocking truth. The HOA we lived in wasn't just an organization managing small housing rules. It was a cover for an international criminal organization laundering money through legitimate companies. The garden repair contractors and landscaping services the HOA often worked with were mere front companies, and enormous sums of money had been transferred into hidden accounts. Each file I opened made me more alarmed. The financial reports showed a close connection between the HOA and international organizations, with money transfers from shell companies overseas. Karen's and other HOA members' trips weren't business trips. They were related to money deals with international partners, those behind a global money laundering scheme. One of the surveillance images I opened left me stunned. It was a photo of Karen, but it wasn't an ordinary photo. In this photo, she was meeting with a strange man in a luxurious restaurant, and I realized that the man was one of the police officers I had seen the previous day. This only deepened my confusion. What I had thought was normal, those absurd regulations about plants, the unreasonable fines from the HOA, turned out to be pieces of a larger plan I had never had the chance to understand. When I closed the laptop, my feelings weren't just of shock, but also of anger. Anger that I had been kept in the dark about such a huge secret. Anger that my wife had lived in this neighborhood for a whole year, and I had no idea. I sat there, staring at the documents Sarah had left behind, asking myself, what had she been doing all this time? How had I not noticed? I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had just discovered. The documents Sarah left behind were just the tip of the iceberg. I felt like I had been pulled into a story I had never known, and now I had to face the reality that everything I thought was normal was just a perfect cover. But as I thought more about what Sarah had written in her letter, one thought suddenly flashed in my mind. Were the people around me involved in everything that was happening? Elmwood Gardens had always seemed like a peaceful neighborhood with friendly neighbors, each with a unique characteristic that I thought was very normal. Bob, the grumpy old man living at the end of the alley, was always making it difficult for the kids to play near his garden. I always thought he was just an old man who didn't like noise. Then there was Priya, the young girl who walked her dog around the neighborhood every morning. She always smiled and greeted everyone, seemingly nothing special other than caring for her dog. And George, the neighborhood mailman, who always stood by the gate, delivering the mail with a gentle smile as if nothing unusual was happening. But now, as I reflected on it, those people weren't as normal as I thought. I dug further into the documents Sarah had left and found some important information. Bob, Priya, and George, they were all listed in the secret files Sarah had kept. And the horrifying thing was, they were all CIA agents, working under Sarah's direction. Each of them had a specific role in the intelligence network Sarah had set up in this neighborhood. Bob was responsible for gathering information on HOA's financial transactions. Priya was investigating Karen's and other HOA members' diplomatic ties, while George was in charge of monitoring transactions and transferring confidential information through unassuming means. All three of them had very specific and crucial tasks in the investigation Sarah was carrying out. The feeling I had now was indescribable. I had been living next to spies without knowing it. The people I thought were ordinary neighbors were actually key players in an international intelligence operation. I began to realize that everything I thought was peaceful in Elmwood Gardens had only been a layer of protection hiding dangerous activities beneath. But I didn't have time to think about all this. I needed to act. Sarah had been taken, and I had to do everything I could to rescue her. As I flipped through the remaining documents, I saw that Sarah had planned this out in great detail. She had prepared a strategy to dismantle the HOA's security system, and I was the one who had to execute that plan. With the help of Bob, Priya, and George, I joined in a daring rescue mission. Each person in this team had special skills and experience. Bob, as the intelligence gatherer, would help me identify weaknesses in HOA's financial system. Priya, with her knowledge of the community's relationships, would help me infiltrate meetings and create distractions to pull attention away from the area we needed to attack. And George, the mailman, would help me deliver information and set up communication between the groups during the rescue. Our plan was very clear. First, We had to infiltrate HOA's security system and disable all surveillance cameras, all security devices in the area, to create a gap in their protection. Once there was no external surveillance, we would have the chance to rescue Sarah from the hands of the fake police officers holding her. I felt some anger and disappointment because I hadn't recognized what was happening right in front of me all this time, but now I had no choice but to join Sarah's plan. And with the help of the people I thought were ordinary, I would do everything I could to rescue her, because I couldn't let her suffer alone in this fight. I no longer had time to think too much. Sarah had been taken and was being held captive, but her plan was fully prepared. Everything was ready to be executed. I couldn't just stand by and watch her in danger without doing anything. With the help of the intelligence team Sarah had set up in the neighborhood, I began to take part in the rescue plan. We weren't just facing the fake HOA police officers. We were up against Karen and the international criminals she led. Sarah's team had set up a meticulous strategy to dismantle HOA's security system. The entire neighborhood, from the surveillance cameras to the communication systems, was disabled. Now, we had our opportunity. I stood in the shadows, looking toward the clubhouse, where I knew Sarah was being held. The team members had taken their positions. Bob, Priya, and George had completed their tasks, and now it was our turn. Everything had been carefully calculated, but none of us could have predicted that this confrontation would become a brutal battle. The entire HOA area had now turned into a tense battlefield, where every move could decide life or death. Sarah, her agents, and I had prepared meticulously. Everything had been planned out. Every step, every movement had to be flawless. Despite being outnumbered, we would never give up. First, Bob, with his extensive tactical experience, took the strategic position. He stood high, observing every movement of the enemy. One of the HOA police rushed towards us, but just as he did, Bob fired a shot at the tree near him, creating a loud noise that distracted the enemy. At that moment, Priya, quick as a panther, leaped out from behind, swiftly overpowering the enemy before he could react. Sarah and I moved toward the center of the area, where Karen and her henchmen were gathering. By now, our team had created an impenetrable formation. However, this confrontation wasn't over yet. Karen stood at the center, looking at us with calculating eyes. "This is the end of you," Karen said, though her voice lacked the power it once had. She gestured to the remaining HOA police to prepare, but we were ready. Sarah and I charged forward, not giving them a chance to react. The first enemy rushed at me, but I quickly dodged his attack. I spun around, delivering a powerful kick to his stomach, knocking him off balance. Then, I grabbed his hand, making him drop his gun. "Don't make me use this," I warned, my voice cold but determined. At the same time, Sarah confronted Karen. Karen continued to resist, but Sarah kept the upper hand. She used her skills, landing a quick and powerful kick that pushed Karen back, though it wasn't enough to knock her down. They stood facing each other, their eyes locked, as if each knew that the one who made a mistake would pay the price. Meanwhile, Bob and Priya continued battling the remaining HOA police officers. Priya, with her agility, trapped one enemy in a net she had prepared earlier. He struggled, but couldn't escape. Bob stood behind, calmly observing everything, constantly devising strategies to ensure we didn't get cornered. Karen, realizing the situation was slipping beyond her control, turned to look at Sarah and me with eyes full of fury. "You can't win," she hissed. But just then, a shot rang out, fired into the air. George, the mailman, bravely stepped out from behind, his gun still aimed but steady. "Enough, Karen," George said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "This ends today." We had surrounded all the exits. With no way out, Karen lowered her gun, accepting defeat. The remaining HOA police also stopped, no longer wanting to resist. The only sound now was the heavy silence, punctuated by our rapid breaths in the tense air. We had won without losing anyone. No bloodshed, no deaths. Just strategy, determination, and the power of unity. The criminals were captured, and the entire dark scheme of the HOA was exposed. Karen and her henchmen were bound, no longer resisting. Our team, under Sarah's leadership, had completed the mission. We had not only rescued Sarah, but also uncovered the truth about the criminal organization, and most importantly, we had protected the values we all believed in. As everything quieted down, Sarah stood in front of me, her eyes filled with emotion. "We did it," she said, a slight smile crossing her lips. I looked at her, sighed deeply, and in that moment, I realized that even though everything that had happened was tense and dangerous, we had done the right thing. And that was the most important part. The battle was over, but its aftermath still echoed in the heart of Elmwood Gardens. Karen and her accomplices had been arrested, but what they left behind was more than just temporary wounds on the neighborhood. They had built an underground empire over the years, using the seemingly harmless HOA regulations to launder money, commit fraud, and oppress innocent residents. As the police and CIA agents cleaned up the aftermath, the people in the neighborhood began to realize the horrifying truth. The peace they had lived in for so many years was nothing more than a disguise for a sophisticated criminal organization. The next day, a special HOA meeting was held. Karen no longer sat in that seat of power. Her henchmen were detained, awaiting trial. Other members of the HOA who had either been involved in the scheme or turned a blind eye to its illegality now faced serious charges. Some were under investigation for bribery, while others were accused of being involved in the international crime network. A thick curtain of deceit had been torn apart, and the truth had been exposed. Looking back, I couldn't believe I was standing there, in a room where I had once been just an ordinary resident, now about to make a pivotal decision for this community. After Sarah left her mission, and with Karen's downfall, I was the only one elected as the new HOA president. The people in the neighborhood looked at me, unsure of what to do, but their eyes were filled with curiosity and hope. I didn't know exactly how I ended up in this position, but I understood clearly that it was no longer time to continue the harsh rules that Karen had imposed for so many years. As the new HOA president, I realized that this neighborhood needed change. We had all become too accustomed to the unreasonable fines for mailbox colors, for trees, or for hosting family gatherings. We had lived in an atmosphere of fear and pressure, where everything had to conform to strict rules that no one truly understood the reason behind. I began working immediately. First, I canceled all the harsh and unreasonable HOA rules. No more fines for mailbox colors, no more ridiculous checks on trimming trees or hosting parties. Instead, I proposed a new program, one that aimed to make Elmwood Gardens a real community, where people didn't just live next to each other, but were also connected to one another. We organized community events, starting with the first Neighborhood Freedom Day Festival. Everyone in the neighborhood participated, from grumpy old Bob at the end of the alley to the young families that had just moved in. Each family brought food, games, and fun activities. No more invisible walls built by regulations. No more homes shrouded in loneliness. People began to connect, talk, and create new memories. No more tense meetings, no more authoritarian leaders. Everyone could speak up and contribute ideas. Honestly, I never thought I would become the HOA president, but when I stood there, in the middle of the neighborhood, watching everyone laughing and playing together, I knew I had done the right thing. Sarah was no longer here to direct me, but I felt like she was still beside me, guiding every decision I made. She had taught me that the strength of a community isn't in the power of one individual, but in the bonds shared between everyone. The Neighborhood Freedom Day was a resounding success, and it was just the beginning of a larger transformation. The days when I thought I was just a temporary resident in this neighborhood now seemed distant. I understood that we, the people living here, were the ones who could create the change. And when I looked at the colorful gardens, the cozy homes, and the smiles on the neighbors' faces, I knew Elmwood Gardens had changed forever. No more senseless battles, no more ridiculous regulations, just a strong, united community full of hope for the future. After everything that had happened, I looked back and felt a strange sense of happiness. When I first moved to Elmwood Gardens, I thought I would live a quiet, uneventful life. But life proved to me that sometimes peace is just a thin veil. We can't live in indifference or ignore what's happening around us. It's those small, seemingly harmless communities that can sometimes hide dangerous criminal schemes, and it's up to us, the residents, to protect each other and work together to build a better living environment. Elmwood Gardens is no longer just a place where I pass the days. It has become a true community, where people don't just share living space but share care, affection, and responsibility with one another. From those neighbors I once thought were nothing special, we are now one big family, always ready to help each other. We have overcome the greatest challenge this neighborhood has faced and rebuilt an ideal living environment where everyone can be free, happy, and safe. I also learned that in this day and age, we can't afford to overlook any signs of abnormality. People who seem ordinary may sometimes harbor terrifying schemes, and only vigilance and a strong sense of community will help us recognize and respond in time. We must always stay alert, protect one another, and never let anyone exploit our ignorance to carry out bad deeds. What happened has taught me that the truth can always be hidden, but once we unite, we can expose any fraud. And if you're looking for stories about hidden truths in your community, don't forget to follow my channel, HOA Karen Files. Together, we will explore many untold stories, the secrets in neighborhoods you never imagined. Don't miss out on these thrilling and surprising videos, where I continue to bring you stories of how communities can defeat evil forces and protect the true values. Subscribe to HOA Karen Files now so you don't miss any important information. Together, we will continue to build a strong, united community that will never be deceived. Karen steals my water? I get sweet revenge. Welcome to HOA Karen Files. Today, I have an extremely captivating and dramatic story that you cannot miss. Have you ever encountered a difficult neighbor who likes to invade others' rights without hesitation? And have you ever imagined that a water hose could turn an entire neighborhood into chaos, leading to an unimaginable struggle for justice? In today's story, we will follow the journey of Miles, an ordinary man leading a peaceful life, until Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the natural water hose, begins to exploit his property without permission. The ending of this story will make you laugh uncontrollably, but it will also make you think about justice and respect in the community. This story is not just a humorous confrontation between two neighbors. It is a great lesson about protecting personal rights and how justice can come in the most unexpected ways. And I promise that after hearing this story, you won't be able to leave halfway. Every step Miles takes will surprise you, and you won't want to miss the crucial moment. If you find this story interesting, don't hesitate to leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the situation Miles faced. Have you ever encountered a difficult neighbor like Karen? We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any interesting stories from HOA Karen Files. This will be where you'll find funny yet thought-provoking tales about community life and unimaginable struggles for justice. We will continue to bring you fresh, engaging, and thought-provoking videos. Hit subscribe now and join us on the journey of discovering surprising stories from HOA Karen Files. Do you believe a water hose can make an entire neighborhood riot? If you think political scandals or workplace arguments are what make a neighborhood buzz, I have a story that will change how you view chaos in the community. Don't be fooled by appearances of peace because it was a water hose that turned my neighborhood into a battlefield. I'm Miles Carter, a freelance graphic designer. After a fire at my old apartment building, I decided to seek peace in a suburban neighborhood where there were no car horns, no blaring music, just fresh air and lush green lawns. I thought this peaceful life would last, but in reality, that was just the beginning of an unexpected story. I live alone, no kids, no pets, and I didn't install an automatic irrigation system for the garden. Yet somehow, the land seemed to have been automatically watered. At this point, I couldn't help but wonder, was someone using my water without me knowing? Have you ever woken up, stepped outside with a cup of coffee in hand, and wondered why your lawn was soaked like it had just been through a tropical rainstorm? Or did you ever see your water bill skyrocket by 400% just because a water hose had an unexpected visitor every morning? One morning, I couldn't believe my eyes. The entire front yard, where there were only a few cacti and some homegrown vegetable beds, was flooded like it had rained all night. But the sky was clear, the sun was shining, and not a drop of rain had fallen. The soil was soggy, puddles of water everywhere, and my water hose was lying on the lawn as if someone had just used it and forgotten to put it away. That was exactly my situation 3 weeks ago when I woke up on a Tuesday morning, grabbed my cup of coffee, and walked outside. The sunlight was shining down on the grass, but instead of the familiar dry scene, I saw a huge puddle. The ground was soggy, puddles everywhere, as if it had rained heavily the night before, although the sky was clear. I stood there in surprise, not understanding what was happening. My water hose was right there, lying on the lawn, as if someone had just used it and forgotten to put it away. But this wasn't just an accidental rainstorm. It was a strange phenomenon I couldn't explain. Soon after, I realized I wasn't the only one affected. My water bill, which had me worried, skyrocketed from $50 to nearly $200 in just 1 month. Things got even stranger when there was nothing in my yard except a withered tomato plant and a rusty barbecue grill. I wondered, was someone using my water without me knowing? Surely someone was. And that someone was Karen, my new neighbor. The next day, I decided to get to the bottom of this. The sudden increase in my water bill made it impossible for me to stay calm. I checked every corner of the yard, examined the hose and the piping system, but there was no sign of any fault or damage. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was secretly using my water. Unable to wait any longer, I began my investigation. I asked some neighbors, and they all confirmed that they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Yet, in my gut, I felt something wasn't right, as this couldn't be a coincidence. And then, on a beautiful Saturday morning, when I had just returned from the market, I caught her red-handed. As I parked in front of my house, I saw a sight that left me speechless. Karen, my new neighbor, was dragging my water hose over the fence, straight to her car. She connected the hose to a car washing kit and began spraying water on her car. All I could do was stand there, sitting in my car, with my hand on the steering wheel, speechless. The scene couldn't have been stranger. Karen, wearing a flowery dress and a wide-brimmed hat, was washing her car in the sunlight as though she were doing something completely legal. And when she noticed I was watching, instead of feeling embarrassed, she just smiled and waved at me in a friendly manner. She casually said, "It's just a little water. We live in a shared community, right? If you think I just stood there and ignored her, you're wrong. This wasn't sharing, this was theft." And I couldn't let her continue taking what didn't belong to her without permission. But what bothered me the most was the way she said it. Like I was part of some shared community, where she thought she had the right to take whatever she wanted without asking. She wasn't just taking my water, she treated it like it was perfectly natural. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, not a communal space where everyone was free to take each other's belongings. The feeling of invasion made it impossible for me to ignore. I tried to stay calm, took a deep breath, and politely asked, "Karen, could you tell me why you're using my water hose without permission?" She didn't feel the least bit embarrassed. On the contrary, she kept her charming smile and responded, "Oh, don't worry, it's not a big deal. I think we should share. Everything in this neighborhood is for everyone." I almost couldn't believe my ears. She was talking about sharing when, in reality, it was outright theft. But I didn't want to cause a scene. I decided to handle this politely but firmly. I stood there for a moment, unable to believe what she had just said. After a few seconds of silence, I calmly replied, "Karen, I think you've misunderstood. My water is not a communal resource, it belongs to me. If you need water, I think you should ask before taking it." And just like that, her door closed without an apology. That's when I realized I had to do something, but I couldn't handle this the usual way. If I just stopped at a mild warning, she would never understand. After the conversation with Karen ended, I stood there for a while, my mind spinning with thoughts. I couldn't keep ignoring this unreasonable behavior, especially when she didn't feel there was anything wrong with it. Maybe I had been a bit soft in my first reminder, but next time, I wouldn't let it slide so easily. I knew one thing for sure: no one can stay silent when their rights are violated. And if I only relied on a mild reminder, Karen would never stop. She would think she could keep taking whatever she wanted without facing any consequences. But this wasn't just about a water hose. It was about boundaries, ownership, and respect in a community. Not wanting to escalate things directly, I decided to go the formal route. I thought the HOA would be the place I could seek support. I took pictures proving her use of my water hose without permission and emailed the HOA, asking them to intervene in the matter. I hoped the HOA, as the neighborhood management body, would take this seriously. I attached the water bill along with photos showing Karen using my hose to wash her car without permission. I also requested the HOA clarify the rules regarding using someone else's property without consent. After a few days of waiting, I received a response from the HOA. However, that response only frustrated me even more. "Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. We encourage residents to resolve minor disputes on their own without the HOA's involvement. This response only added fuel to the fire. They did nothing. I had hoped too much from what's called the official procedure, but in reality, the HOA was only concerned with avoiding disputes. Instead of protecting my rights, they suggested I handle the situation peacefully. I couldn't just sit idly by while she continued to exploit my property without any response. After realizing that the HOA had no intention of intervening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a water hose lock and installed it. I thought that if Karen couldn't access my hose, she would no longer be able to use it whenever she wanted. The next day, I sat inside the house, waiting. When I looked out the window, I saw something unbelievable. The lock had been cut. Someone had clearly used a cutting tool, and I didn't need to look any further to know that it was Karen. Not only that, she continued washing her car with unbelievable confidence. I felt like I was living in a dark comedy, where my efforts to protect my property were being treated as a joke. Karen not only violated the rule once, but she treated it like an entitlement, and that made me feel like I was being mocked. All my efforts only made her more arrogant. At this point, I realized something important. If I wanted Karen to face consequences, I couldn't just rely on direct measures. I needed stronger, undeniable evidence. This wasn't just about protecting my property. It was about making sure such invasive actions wouldn't continue. After a few days of being exploited by Karen with no response from the HOA, I decided it was time to act more creatively. What I had done before, like emailing the HOA or installing the hose lock, clearly wasn't effective. Things even became meaningless when I witnessed Karen continuing to invade my property without any obstruction. But now, I couldn't just stand by. I had to find a way to make her not only realize she was wrong, but also face severe consequences. The only way to make the entire neighborhood aware of the truth, and for me to take action without legal trouble, was to record everything she did. I thought that technology would be the tool to help me get justice. If the HOA wouldn't intervene, then I'd use the power of the internet. I went out and bought a small surveillance camera, one that could be discreetly installed without anyone noticing. It all went quickly, and I installed it right at the location of my water hose. I hid the camera cleverly, only pointing it at the area where Karen usually dragged my hose. I may not be a tech expert, but I knew that as long as I could record her sneaky actions, I would be able to do something bigger. In the following days, I just waited. In fact, I was even more tense than when facing Karen directly because I knew that once I had the evidence in hand, everything would change. I had decided that if she didn't stop, I would have to take stronger action, and I wouldn't be alone in this fight. On the third day after installing the camera, I heard the sound of water. I opened the surveillance screen on my phone, and the footage from the camera came up clearly. Karen was pulling my hose over the fence, just like always, with no suspicion. She even looked around, thinking no one was watching, and then started using the water to wash her shiny car. Immediately, I uploaded the video to my computer and edited it a bit. I wanted to make sure the video was clear and indisputable. Then, I posted it on the neighborhood forum with the title, Karen, the Queen of the Natural Water Hose. I didn't expect the video to spread so fast. Within a few hours, it had been shared across the neighborhood at an incredible speed. Neighbors I used to just greet casually were now watching and sharing the video. They didn't just express surprise, but also voiced their discontent. Comments started to appear, some opposed Karen's actions, while others mocked her overconfidence. The video spread wider, and the wave of anger grew. Interestingly, within a night, the video went beyond the neighborhood, widely shared on social media, and even strangers started getting involved in the story. There were comments like, "If you live in this neighborhood, never let your water hose be exposed. Is Karen running a free car wash service? She'll definitely get into big trouble if she keeps doing this." Less than 24 hours after the video was posted, I saw the views reach the thousands. People were sharing the video and condemning Karen's actions. Some residents even asked why the HOA hadn't intervened yet. One person even suggested installing an automatic sprinkler system in the area to prevent intruders. Everything seemed like an unofficial battle between me and Karen, with the online community as my ally. However, surprisingly, the HOA still didn't make any move. Despite the video being widely shared and witnessed by many, they sent me only a standard email, saying that the issue still needed to be resolved between the residents. The reason being, the HOA didn't want to get involved in small disputes between neighbors. From that point on, I realized that the HOA only truly acted when there was a bigger complaint or if it affected the neighborhood's reputation, but with the stolen water hose, they didn't care. My story with Karen had reached a point where it couldn't continue the normal way anymore. After her video went viral online, I not only felt satisfied with the support from the community, but also realized something important. Karen would never understand the seriousness of using someone else's property without permission. It was time for a lesson in real justice, a lesson that Karen would never forget. And justice wouldn't just be about punishing her. It had to be sweet, flavorful, and certainly with a bit of an unbearable stench. One day, while driving past a construction site near my house, I happened to see a huge wastewater tank being transported. An idea popped into my head, a perfect plan that made me wonder why I hadn't thought of it earlier. Imagine the scene, a water hose that, when turned on, would spray hellish holy water. The stench would be strong enough to make an army disappear in 5 seconds. I didn't rush to the construction site, but cautiously made an unofficial deal with the workers there. After a few chats, I gathered enough information and bought a tank of wastewater from them at a price they considered a bargain, a few dollars and a thank you from me. Next, I returned home, gathered all the equipment, and installed a secret valve into my water system. This valve could switch the water from clean to wastewater when I activated the remote switch. Surely, Karen would never dare wash her car for free again. The next morning, like a predator waiting, I stood inside my house looking out, phone in hand, eyes fixed on the surveillance camera. Sure enough, Karen had no idea that today would be an unforgettable day. With her smile as bright as ever, she confidently dragged my hose as usual, unaware. And then, the water began to spray. Not clean water, but thick, dark water, with a stench so foul that it made the entire neighborhood stop, drawn in by a fragrance that could only be called the scent of justice. It was unbelievable. The water shot out like a fiery spray from hell. Karen's garden sprinkler system was never prepared for such a sight. Karen stood there in shock, not knowing what was happening, as the dirty water sprayed on her and her car. She stepped back, trying to turn off the hose, but the wastewater kept spraying directly at her, soaking her like a drowned rat, with a smell that was indescribable. The smell didn't just panic her, it made the nearby children run in terror. The children, who had never seen anything like this, screamed and ran away, with one even shouting, "Mom, what is that smell?" The scene couldn't have been more humorous as Karen slipped on the wet ground and fell straight into the lawn chair. She staggered and flailed, as if trying to escape from a real chemical disaster. The neighbors, who had witnessed her trespassing on my property, couldn't hold back their laughter anymore. Phones started recording, and everyone was capturing every moment of this justice-filled revenge. The neighbors around the scene began to scramble to record the event. Some filmed, others laughed uncontrollably, and even one neighbor chimed in with a chuckling voice. "Karen is getting a free car wash service from our neighborhood." They sent the videos to each other, posted them online, and soon, everyone in the neighborhood knew about the scent of justice incident. The story became the talk of the town, and Karen couldn't resist the humiliation anymore. After being drenched in wastewater in a perfect, unforgettable spectacle, Karen couldn't stay silent anymore. As the neighbors began to laugh and post videos online, she launched a noisy counterattack that I never expected. Instead of accepting the truth, Karen sued me for biological assault. No kidding, she really filed a lawsuit with an incredibly creative reason. She accused me of intentionally polluting the air and creating a biological hazard for her, claiming that the wastewater could cause diseases, although I'm pretty sure it only ruined her image. She said I had violated her personal rights and caused a biological disaster in the neighborhood. Not only did she sue me in court, but Karen also filed a complaint with the HOA, urging them to punish me for actions that didn't align with community standards. At first, I could only shake my head and laugh. I couldn't believe she could be serious enough to turn a humorous situation into such a serious lawsuit. Soon after, the HOA, not wanting to attract unnecessary attention and avoid getting involved in the lawsuit, sent me a penalty notice for disrupting the peace and disturbing the neighborhood order. Naturally, I wasn't too surprised, as the HOA, as always, preferred to avoid complicated situations. They didn't seem to care who was right or wrong. They just wanted to maintain peace. But I'm not the type of person to remain passive in situations like this. Instead of bowing my head and accepting the fine, I did something Karen and the HOA didn't expect. I appealed. I prepared a thick file with all the necessary evidence to defend myself and prove that I was completely right. Not only did I have the video capturing Karen's water theft, but I also had water bills showing the huge cost I had to pay because of her actions. In addition, I also included a copy of the HOA regulations, which clearly stated, prohibited entry into another person's property without permission, especially the use of another person's property without consent. With such a complete file, no one could continue to side with Karen. Not only did I have solid evidence, but I also had a valid reason to file a lawsuit against her, and the HOA had failed to fulfill its responsibility to protect residents. After a week of tension, the HOA called an emergency meeting to address the issue. The whole neighborhood had heard about this battle, and perhaps never before had the residents paid such close attention to the HOA. People started sending emails supporting me. Letters from other residents expressing support and demanding the HOA act fairly began appearing. They started comparing Karen's video with the HOA's rules, and everyone realized that she had violated them severely. When the meeting ended, the result was more surprising than expected. The HOA decided to fine Karen. Not only that, they revoked her voting rights in the HOA for 6 months and required her to amend her behavior if she didn't want to face further consequences. She was penalized for not only disturbing me, but also causing trouble for the whole neighborhood. Karen had completely failed. She not only lost her voting rights in the HOA, but she also lost face in front of the entire neighborhood. No one here supported her anymore, and all that remained was the humiliation and awkwardness when she realized that her actions had not only been exposed online, but also completely boycotted by the residents. With Karen fined and stripped of her decision-making powers in the HOA, the atmosphere in the neighborhood returned to peace. People now knew that if you infringed on someone else's rights, there would be consequences. Other residents began inviting me to barbecue parties, and not only that, a few even gave me a new hose to replace the one that had been misused before. My story with Karen had become a lesson about respecting others' property and ensuring that wrongful actions would have consequences. Now, my neighborhood was no longer a place where anyone could do whatever they wanted. From now on, anyone who wanted free water would surely think twice. After all the turmoil and embarrassment, Karen ultimately couldn't take it anymore. She moved out quietly, without saying goodbye or offering any explanation. The whole neighborhood just looked at each other and sighed in relief, as if everything had returned to normal, although a part of us felt the absence of a villain in this story. The new family that moved into Karen's house was a young couple, kind and polite, completely the opposite of the previous owner. On their first day, they brought a homemade cake to greet the neighbors. They smiled, chatted amiably, and immediately won everyone over. It was a breath of fresh air for this neighborhood, which had been tense due to Karen's presence. Looking at them, I couldn't help but feel that the neighborhood had finally returned to the true meaning of community. Everything seemed to have ended, but not long after, I received an email from a resident in the neighborhood where Karen had moved to. The email subject read, "She's using someone else's hose again. Any plans for a counterattack?" That question made me laugh. Part of me felt satisfied because, finally, not only I but also others in the neighboring areas had started noticing Karen's wrongdoings. It turned out, Karen still hadn't learned her lesson. She continued acting as though nothing had changed, still using other people's hoses covertly, this time in her new neighborhood. I didn't respond immediately. In that moment, I felt like an ordinary man facing a new version of Karen. However, instead of feeling frustrated or angry, I decided to do something humorous and somewhat cold. I sat down at my desk, opened my computer, and drafted a reply. The response I sent was simple, but also quite pointed. "I'm sending you the full technical diagram. Good luck." And so, Karen's story began a new chapter in another neighborhood. But this time, it wouldn't be me dealing with her unacceptable actions. It would be the residents there. After all, I knew that justice wasn't just about me winning again. Justice had passed through all the nooks and crannies, and in the end, Karen would realize that no one could freely exploit others without paying the price. After everything that had happened, I couldn't help but look back and reflect on the valuable lessons I had learned throughout this journey. In the end, the story of Karen was not just about protecting personal property or finding a way to punish a wrongdoing, but about ensuring we protect our own boundaries. I don't want to say that I defeated Karen just for revenge. What I wanted was to restore respect in a community, to help this neighborhood realize that every action has consequences, whether it's a small misstep or a major violation. Sometimes, what we call justice isn't a glamorous ending, but a balance, a way to bring everything back into proper order. For me, victory wasn't about bringing down an enemy, but about maintaining peace and protecting my rights without harming anyone. That's why I always try not only to solve the problem, but also to leave a lesson for everyone around me. And I hope that my story can serve as a reminder for anyone facing similar challenges, that it's never too late to stand up for your own rights. If you like this story and want to follow more humorous, bizarre, yet meaningful situations about community issues, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, HOA Karen Files. We not only tell entertaining stories, but also bring valuable lessons about life, fairness, and how we can build a strong, respectful community. Click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any interesting stories. Join me as we share funny moments, learn from mistakes, and work together to create a stronger community. Thank you for following this story, and I hope to see you in the next videos of HOA Karen Files, where we explore interesting tales about community and justice. HOA detains black teen running, but didn't expect his father was a federal judge. Welcome to HOA Karen Files, where I will take you through real-life, dramatic, yet equally bitter stories of power abuse, racism, and the fight for justice. Today, we will follow the surprising and dramatic story of a family in Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood that seemed peaceful, but hides painful truths beneath the surface. This story begins with a very ordinary action, jogging. But this simple act led to Jordan Carter, a 16-year-old boy, being arrested and facing an unexpected legal battle. Why? Simply because Karen Harris, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, decided that her power must be imposed on everyone, and that a black teenager jogging in her neighborhood was an intruder. What happened next? Jordan, with the support of his father, Anthony Carter, a federal judge, did not let this injustice go unchallenged. What did they do to fight back against Karen's power and the HOA? Would she have to pay for her racist and unreasonable control? This story is not just a battle between father and son against an organization, but a symbol of the struggle for personal freedom, justice, and equality. You won't be able to take your eyes off each twist and turn, and you will definitely reflect on the deep issues this story raises. Follow until the end of the story to see the surprising conclusion and feel the power of justice when it is executed. Don't forget to comment below the video to share your thoughts on the story. What do you think of the unreasonable rules imposed by the HOA? And do you believe the power of such a small organization can really change our lives? If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now to not miss out on the next stories in HOA Karen Files, where justice and truth are always brought to light. I am Anthony Carter, a respected federal judge who has worked in the legal system for over 20 years. My job is not always easy, but I am used to facing challenges, complicated cases, and decisions that could change the lives of others. I am not just a judge, I am also a father, and in that role, I always want to provide the best possible life for my son, Jordan. Jordan, 16, is a sports enthusiast. He is not only my pride, but also the joy of my life. Every day, I see him diligently studying and training, and I always encourage him to maintain those healthy habits. Sports not only help Jordan develop physically, but also help him relieve stress, because life is not always easy for a teenager. We live in Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood I once considered ideal. Oak Ridge Heights, with its wide streets, beautiful homes, and peaceful atmosphere, was once the place where my family and I felt at peace, where I could relax after stressful work hours. I thought this would be the place for Jordan to grow up in tranquility, not worrying about external troubles. However, in recent years, this neighborhood has started to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. The rules of the Homeowners Association, where Karen Harris, the president, holds significant power, have become increasingly strict and unreasonable. Her decisions no longer seem aimed at protecting the community, but at controlling everything, from how people decorate their homes to who has the right to live here. Oak Ridge Heights, once a peaceful place, has now become a neighborhood full of underlying tension where the power of a few can determine the lives of all of us. That morning, as usual, Jordan woke up early, around 6:30 a.m. For me, it was a familiar sight. He hurriedly changed into his workout clothes, put on his shoes, and rushed out the door without forgetting to shout, "Have a good day, Dad." Jordan had kept this routine for the past 3 months, and I knew exactly why. At 16, with all the academic pressure, family expectations, and teenage issues anyone at that age faces, jogging had become Jordan's way to relieve stress and seek peace of mind. Jogging not only helped him maintain physical health, but also cleared his mind, allowing him to find relaxation in those early morning hours when the air was still fresh, and the world had not yet been swept into the rush of a new day. Over the past months, I've watched him start his mornings like this, regularly and patiently. It was the only time of the day when Jordan felt he could let go of all his worries and focus solely on the steady steps on the familiar path. I didn't think much about it, as I had gotten used to my son's routine. I thought today would be just like any other day. He would jog, come back after about an hour, we would have breakfast together, and then I would continue my work. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing could prepare me for the sudden change that would confront our whole family just a few hours later. My eyes were still sleepy, not yet out of bed, when my phone suddenly rang. A call without a caller name, but I immediately recognized the number as an unfamiliar one. Without any bad premonitions, I answered, and then Jordan's voice came through the line. His tone was a little worried, unlike his usual self. "Dad, I've been arrested. They said I can't jog in this neighborhood." A moment of silence passed before I could understand what was happening. The feeling was one of surprise, then confusion. No way. Why would my son be arrested just for jogging in our own neighborhood? Jordan's voice hurriedly continued. "They said I'm not allowed to jog on the public road in this neighborhood. I'm at the police station." My eyes widened, and at that moment, I was fully awake. What I was hearing could not be true. When I arrived at the police station, the atmosphere in the room immediately changed. The officers were still sipping coffee and chatting, but as soon as I walked in, everything fell into an eerie silence. There were exchanged glances between them, uneasy and uncomfortable looks. They knew who I was, a federal judge, and I knew this situation wouldn't be simple. I felt the pressure from them, as if they were trying to handle this situation as easily as possible without me getting involved. I had prepared myself for what I was about to face. A simple case wouldn't involve me, but this case was different. Standing before me was Karen Harris, the president of the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. No one could ignore her presence. Karen stood there, not showing the slightest hint of discomfort or worry, but rather exuding self-satisfaction, as if she had won a battle in an unequal fight. She stood straight, arms crossed, a subtle smile on her face, as if arresting my son was a grand victory she had every right to be proud of. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice cold and emotionless, "this neighborhood is not the place for your son to jog without permission." Her words cut through the air like a knife. I knew this wasn't just an empty statement. This was a declaration of power from someone who had too much control. It was like a key turning in a locked door, preventing any further argument. I looked at her, trying to suppress the anger rising within me, and felt the injustice behind these words. A public neighborhood, and now she was treating my son as if he were an intruder. But there was one thing I couldn't overlook. I looked at her again, and then I realized. Her words weren't just about the power of the HOA. They were about racism. Karen, with her hostile tone and arrogant attitude, didn't just see my son as an intruder. She saw him as one because Jordan was a black boy. And in a neighborhood like Oak Ridge Heights, this made a clear difference in how she viewed my son. It was no accident that when my son jogged by, Karen wasn't the first to see him. Other residents had seen Jordan, and no one said anything. But Karen, with her subtle prejudice, took it upon herself to call the police, not hesitating to label him an intruder just because of his skin color and the presence of a young person who wasn't an official member of this community. I couldn't just sit back and accept this. But at that moment, I had to remain calm. A judge, a father, must know when to act and when to step back. I just stared at her, not saying a word, letting the silence speak for itself. Then I turned to the officers. "Do you know?" I began, my voice calm but firm, that arresting my son is an act without any legal basis. It's an abuse of power, and you're all being pulled into a power play that Karen has orchestrated. They didn't answer. The atmosphere grew heavier, and it seemed like they were waiting for me to say something, or for some action from me, to proceed. But I knew I couldn't just leave. I am a judge, and I never let injustice slide without a fight. The whole neighborhood is watching me, and if I don't stand up now, how can I ask others to do the same? Karen Harris had finished speaking, but I could still feel the arrogance in her words. To her, the power she held was everything, and I would be the example for everyone else in this neighborhood. I picked up my phone and immediately called my lawyer. Start a legal battle, I said. This is not just about my son, it's about justice. After standing still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath, I looked directly at Karen Harris. Unable to tolerate this injustice any longer, I asked her to explain why my son was arrested for doing something perfectly normal. Can you explain to me why my son was arrested just for jogging in our neighborhood? My voice wasn't loud, but it was full of determination and uncompromising resolve. Karen looked at me for a moment, as if savoring the worry in my eyes, before replying. Mr. Carter, she said, her tone cold as if I was asking for something unbelievable. According to the rules of the Homeowners Association, jogging in this area is considered trespassing and disturbing the peace. This neighborhood is not a park, and we have the right to maintain the quiet for this community. Her response felt like a cold splash of water to my face. Trespassing? I was so surprised that I couldn't believe what I had just heard. This felt like a bad joke. How could something as normal as jogging be considered trespassing? And what angered me even more was that she truly believed this was a reasonable justification. As I stood there, looking at Karen and hearing her unreasonable reasoning, my eyes couldn't help but glance at the HOA regulations board. The words on the board looked like they were taken straight from a handbook designed to control everything in this neighborhood. No changing the color of the gate without HOA approval. This, I understood, was meant to maintain a consistent standard for the homes. But when Karen required residents to register with the HOA before changing even a small color on their gates, I couldn't help but ask myself, is it really necessary to control the color of the gates? Then I saw another regulation. Everyone must register if they wish to park on the sidewalk, even if it's for just 30 minutes. 30 minutes? Even 30 minutes required permission. This was extreme management. I knew that all these rules had no real reason other than Karen wanting to control everything, from the appearance of homes to the smallest thing, like parking in the neighborhood. Having lived here for many years, I always understood that these rules could be helpful in maintaining order, but to this extent, it was truly excessive. Especially when now, my son was being treated like an intruder simply for jogging, a healthy activity that everyone does to maintain their health. Everything was not only unreasonable, but also carried the subtle racism that Karen was consciously perpetuating. The HOA regulations she spoke about, originally meant to maintain order in the neighborhood, had now become tools for her to control residents who didn't fit into the group she wanted to see here. This neighborhood, where everyone should have the freedom to move and enjoy life, had now become stifling, not for the safety of the community, but because of one person's power and the underlying discrimination. Karen Harris, with her overconfidence, had turned this neighborhood into a place for people like her, those with the same skin color and social class. Despite all the injustice in this situation, I did not lose my temper. I knew that in this moment, patience and calmness were more important than ever. Although my heart was boiling with frustration, I remained composed and looked at Karen with a determined gaze. So, according to you, I can't let my son run in a neighborhood I've lived in for years? I asked, my voice cold but filled with unyielding resolve. The question wasn't just to ask for an explanation, but to challenge the power she had arrogantly claimed for herself. Karen didn't answer immediately. She just shrugged, as if my question was not worth explaining. That was the moment I knew that this wasn't just about rules or compliance. This was open abuse of power, where someone, simply because they held power, could impose unreasonable rules on others without facing any consequences. Her silence, her shrug, was a clear sign that she knew exactly what she was doing was wrong, yet she gave herself the right to continue acting this way without fear of the consequences. Right after the tense confrontation at the police station, I could not accept the fact that my son had been arrested so unjustly for something as simple as jogging. Jordan was not a criminal. He was just a 16-year-old teenager, living in a public neighborhood, and jogging was a healthy habit he had every morning. The arrest was an unreasonable and abusive use of power. I could not let this pass as a small incident. This was a symbolic case about personal freedom and justice in the community. I immediately demanded that my son be released. I wouldn't let them keep him for another second. I am a federal judge, and I understood my rights in this situation. I demanded to meet the person responsible for making the arrest decision, the officers who had no legal grounds to detain Jordan. Someone like me could not stand by and let power be abused without fighting back. As soon as I stepped out of the police station, I contacted my lawyer immediately. This was no longer a personal lawsuit. It was a legal battle with a greater purpose: to free Jordan and make the HOA pay for abusing its power. I wasn't just fighting for my son. I was fighting for all the residents in this neighborhood, those who were living under the rule of a powerful group that could impose unreasonable and discriminatory rules without facing any resistance. A formal lawsuit was filed. My goal wasn't just to prove that Jordan was innocent and deserved to be free. I wanted to prove that this abuse of power was a significant danger to everyone's freedom and rights in the neighborhood. And I wanted those behind the HOA, especially Karen Harris, to be held accountable for their actions. Karen and her group could not continue to exist in a neighborhood where its residents only wanted to live in peace and freedom. Every legal battle was a step forward, and I would not stop until justice was served. As the legal battle began, public opinion quickly shifted. Just as I had predicted, this case was not just a simple personal lawsuit. Soon after the news about Jordan's arrest broke, the media began reporting, and social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForJordan and #HOABias. Our story became a major issue, and people began to realize that this was not just an unreasonable act of discrimination, but also a dangerous manifestation of the abuse of power. #JusticeForJordan spread quickly, becoming a call for justice, not just for my family, but for anyone who had ever been oppressed by the abuse of power in their community. Posts, videos, and comments from neighborhood residents who couldn't bear the injustice began to appear more frequently. A movement against Karen Harris and the HOA board quickly formed. This wasn't just happening in Oak Ridge Heights. Social media became the place for residents from other neighborhoods to speak out, sharing their stories about excessive control and the unreasonable rules imposed by their HOAs. The online community began questioning the role of HOAs in residential areas and the strict regulations that many neighborhoods were enduring. This shift became even clearer as neighborhood residents began to realize the absurdity of the HOA's regulations. They could no longer accept such an organization, where one individual could abuse power without facing any consequences. Although some were still afraid or hesitant to confront the HOA, the majority began to speak out. They would no longer accept this unreasonable control. The residents of Oak Ridge Heights began to realize that they were not pawns in Karen Harris's game. And then, a wave of strong support from the neighborhood residents emerged. They began contacting our lawyer, asking to join the fight, or at least sending letters protesting the unreasonable rules imposed on them. A large portion of the residents signed petitions demanding the dissolution of the HOA, feeling that this organization was no longer appropriate and didn't deserve to continue existing in the community. Despite Karen Harris and other HOA members trying to ease the situation, public opinion had completely changed. The entire neighborhood no longer stood silent in the face of oppression and discrimination, and now, they stood with my family, supporting the fight to bring justice for my son. No one imagined that Oak Ridge Heights, a quiet neighborhood, would become the focal point of such a major struggle. Karen had become a symbol of discrimination and unreasonable control. What she thought was absolute power had now become her worst nightmare. In the past, she stood at the peak of power, seeing herself as the guardian of order in this neighborhood. But now, everything had changed. She was facing an unrelenting legal storm. The reason was that now, the entire community had realized that Karen's abuse of power and the HOA's actions were not just an issue for my family. It was an issue for all the residents in the neighborhood. And when public opinion began to awaken, no one could stop this fight. The sense of justice was rising, and Karen Harris was no longer the one holding the decision-making power. She was the one facing the devastating consequences of her actions. While Karen clung to the fake power she once held, the truth was, no one feared her anymore. Her late apologies and awkward handshakes were nothing but acts that couldn't save the HOA from its collapse. As this fight came to an end, I saw clear changes in the neighborhood. The downfall of the HOA was not just a victory for my family. It was a victory for everyone who had suffered from oppression, discrimination, and abuse of power. Karen could not withstand the legal storm, and Oak Ridge Heights was no longer a place of unreasonable rules. Instead, it became a true community, where people could live freely without fear of being controlled by harsh and discriminatory regulations. This victory wasn't just mine. It was for all the residents of this neighborhood. Justice had been served. After months of relentless fighting, with strong support from the public, 82% of the neighborhood residents voted to dissolve the HOA. Karen Harris's power finally shattered, and the ridiculous regulations she imposed on the neighborhood, such as banning the color change of gates or requiring registration to park on the sidewalk for even just a few minutes, have now been completely removed. Karen was no longer in control. The HOA, which she had used to enforce her unreasonable power for many years, no longer existed. A significant change had taken place, and this didn't just mean that my family had won. It also meant that this neighborhood had regained freedom and a true sense of community. With the HOA dissolved, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of relief. But what truly satisfied me was when I received a call from a friend in the neighborhood. He was someone I had gotten to know since moving to Oak Ridge Heights, a quiet person who clearly cared deeply about the community. He said, "I know you're a judge, but you're the first one to make this neighborhood truly feel like home for us." His words took me by surprise. I never thought what I did would have such a big impact. I didn't do this to become a hero. I just did what I felt was right. But when I heard those words, I felt the power of unity and justice. Yes, I had won, not just for my son, but for all the residents of this neighborhood. They had stood up to reclaim their freedom and fairness. I smiled, and in that moment, I felt like I had won, not only in this legal battle, but in the battle for a livable community, where no one would suffer from discrimination or unreasonable control. When I looked at Jordan, he was smiling, proud to know that not just he, but the entire neighborhood, was now free. We had protected the values I've always believed in: freedom, justice, and mutual respect. When it was all over, Jordan returned to his jogging routine, but this time, the difference was that he no longer had to worry about being stopped or having the police called on him. He ran freely, without the fear lurking in every step. Oak Ridge Heights, which had once been full of control and discrimination, had now truly become a community worth living in. The residents could communicate freely, no longer bound by ridiculous rules. People were living for each other, for the beauty of freedom and respect for personal rights. I felt incredibly proud of what had been achieved, not just because I had protected Jordan from injustice, but because I had helped restore this neighborhood to its true values, where everyone could live freely without fear of oppression or discrimination. I wasn't a hero, I just did what I believed was right, and that's what the people in this community needed. And I wonder, can we continue to protect these rights for everyone in society? But another question also crossed my mind. Will people like Karen always exist? Those who want to use power to control others? Or can we change and build truly fair and equal communities? With what has happened, I believe we can. If you find this story meaningful and want to follow more about issues related to the abuse of power and how we can fight for justice, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, HOA Karen Files. Here, we'll continue to explore real-life stories, cases where local governments and organizations may abuse power, and more importantly, how we can stand up and create change. Don't forget to like and share if you think this story deserves to be spread. Let's work together to build a strong community where justice always prevails. HOA Karen versus Cartel: the secret war behind the fence. In a remote part of Texas, where the vast plains stretch as far as the eye can see and the sunset paints the horizon in shades of red, an intriguing story quietly unfolded. A story not just about crime and the law, but about how everyday conflicts can escalate into unexpected battles. Jack "Hawk" Morrison, a man who spent 15 years chasing drug criminals in the big cities, chose this 20-acre farm as his refuge to escape the sound of gunfire, the smell of smoke, and the haunting memories of his last case in Phoenix. where he narrowly escaped death at the hands of a sniper. For him, this was an opportunity to find peace, to hear the gentle ringing of cattle bells, and gaze at the starry sky without the interference of city lights. But fate rarely favors us. Jack's adversary was not just Hector Alvarez, a suspect thought to be an associate of the Los Zetas cartel, running a drug trafficking point right next to the farm, but also Karen Voss, a neighbor who called herself the HOA president and had ambitions of imposing ridiculous rules on all the residents, from the color of the horse barn to the placement of bicycles. This story isn't just a dry news report about crime or local policies. It's a vibrant portrayal of how personal conflicts can intersect with bigger, underground schemes, creating a sequence of events that are both dramatic and ironically humorous. Karen, with her arrogance and boundless curiosity, unwittingly becomes the spark that ignites a confrontation far beyond her control, while Jack and his partner Tony T-Rex Ramirez get drawn into a double battle, fighting against Karen's harassment while secretly monitoring the real danger posed by Alvarez. Can a stubborn neighbor unintentionally dismantle a criminal network? Will the law and patience triumph over the chaos of unreasonable regulations? We invite you to follow this thrilling story to the end to find out. And feel free to leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. What would you do if faced with a Karen in real life, or if you discovered a cartel right next door? Your thoughts are valuable, so join the discussion and explore more similar stories on the HOA Karen Files channel, where we bring unique perspectives on the law, community, and never-boring neighbors. It all started 8 months ago when I, Jack Hawk Morrison, decided to leave behind the days of chasing drug criminals in the big cities. After 15 years as a DEA agent, I had lived through moments that most people only see in the movies. Late-night raids, the deafening sound of gunfire mixed with screams, and the cold, emotionless stares of criminals in the interrogation room. That job not only required bravery, but also wore down my soul day by day. I longed for peace, a place without police sirens, without the acrid smell of gunpowder, and without the nightmares that dragged me out of sleep. My last case in Phoenix was the wind that pushed me to make that decision. It was a hot summer night, the air thick and suffocating. We were taking down a major drug operation. Everything seemed under control until a sniper hidden on the roof took aim at me. The bullet grazed my ear, leaving a searing burn and a shrill whine that echoed in my head for months. I survived, but the stench of gunpowder, the metallic slice through the air, and the chilling feeling of facing death took root deep in my mind. Every night, I woke up drenched in cold sweat, my hands shaking as if still holding a gun. I knew I had to stop. The 20-acre farm in the remote Texas countryside was my escape. It sat between low hills covered in wild grass, the plains stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with a few ancient oak trees and thorny bushes. The small wooden house I lived in had a wide porch, where I would stand each morning with a hot cup of coffee, watching the golden sunrise paint the land. The cows grazed peacefully under the amber glow of the setting sun, their bells gently jingling in the wind. I had bought an old horse named Dusty, and each afternoon I would take it for a walk around the farm, feeling a peace I had never known in the past 15 years. The night sky here was a masterpiece, clear, sparkling with millions of stars, unmarred by the glow of city lights. I would often lie on the grass behind the house, listening to the chirping of crickets and the wind rustling through the trees, letting nature soothe the invisible scars on my soul. I thought I had finally escaped the troubles, that this would be the place where I could find myself after years of chaos. But I was wrong. 3 days after moving in, Karen appeared. I was standing by the horse barn, holding a feed bucket for Dusty, when I heard the whine of an engine in the distance. An old golf cart, with peeling white paint and a flashing yellow light on top that blinked uselessly in the daylight, rolled up to the farm gate. Karen was behind the wheel, her posture smug as if she were the queen of the land. She stepped out of the car, holding a thick compliance checklist and wearing an expensive pair of binoculars around her neck, which I later discovered she had purchased with HOA funds, unbeknownst to anyone. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said in a sweet but insincere voice, her cold blue eyes scanning every detail of my farm. She stopped in front of the barn painted a deep red, the color I chose because it reminded me of peaceful days back home, and frowned. "What color is this barn?" "It's awful. It's ruining the community color scheme, she said, pointing at the barn as if it were an unforgivable stain. I shrugged, replying flatly, "This farm isn't in your area." Karen sneered, her lips pressed into a thin line, a glint of challenge in her eyes. "Just wait, buddy." I could feel the danger radiating from her, not the kind from guns, but the relentless, authoritarian kind of someone who wants to control everything. Next to me was Tony T-Rex Ramirez, a former colleague from the DEA who had recently moved here to work with me. Tony was a head shorter than me, but tough and quick, with short black hair and eyes always gleaming with mischief. He had a dark sense of humor, the kind that helped us get through the tensest moments in our cases, and a habit of chewing gum at all times, even when facing danger. He spat a piece of gum on the ground, watching Karen leave with a mocking glance. "She looks like she just stepped out of a B-horror movie, with that golf cart and those binoculars. What's she planning to do, birdwatch?" he whispered to me, his tone both funny and cautious. I chuckled lightly, but I couldn't deny the uneasy feeling. "Be careful, Hawk," Tony said, his voice more serious this time. "People like her don't know when to stop. They'll dig until they find something to latch onto." I nodded, watching Karen's figure disappear in the distance, the golf cart whizzing away. Rex, my loyal German shepherd, stood beside me, his fur standing on end, growling softly in his throat as if he, too, sensed the threat from this woman. I patted Rex's head, whispering, "Easy, buddy." But deep down, I knew my brief moment of peace had officially ended. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She was a self-proclaimed tyrant, ruling the neighborhood like an outdoor prison with an unyielding iron fist. Every day, as the first light of dawn broke, Karen would rise, donning a faded green polo shirt with the crooked HOA logo embroidered on it, a cap pulled low over her curly, bleached blonde hair, and hop into her old, faded white golf cart to begin her patrol mission. The whine of the engine echoed steadily along the dirt road, the yellow flashing light flickering weakly, almost as a silent warning to anyone daring to challenge her power. In Karen's hand was a thick, black, ink-stained notebook where she meticulously recorded every violation, no matter how minor. A bicycle slightly off the path, a trash can left slightly open, or a bush growing a few centimeters beyond the perfect boundary of a fence. She would stop in front of each house, pull out a measuring tape from her pocket, and measure the distance from the tree trunk to the edge of the sidewalk with the focus of an engineer, then shake her head and sigh as if she had discovered a serious crime. "Unacceptable," she would mutter, her pen swiftly scratching across the paper, her cold eyes sharp like a hunting hawk. For me, Jack Hawk Morrison, a retired DEA agent, Karen seemed to have a special, almost obsessive attention. Perhaps she sensed the challenge in my calm demeanor, or maybe she simply couldn't stand the fact that I never bowed to her ridiculous rules. She hated my dog, Rex, a gray-haired German shepherd I had rescued from a drug bust over a decade ago. Rex had once been my partner, tracking the most dangerous criminals down dusty roads, and now he spent his days peacefully retired by my side on the farm. But whenever Karen would drive her golf cart slowly by my wooden fence, Rex would growl, his fur standing on end, his dark brown eyes tracking her every move like a loyal bodyguard. "His barking is disturbing the retired folks," Karen would complain, pointing at Rex as though he were a wanted criminal. I would stand there, petting Rex's thick coat, feeling the warmth of my old friend, and reply with a smirk, "He's more polite than some of the nosy ones, Karen." She would glare at me, her lips pressed into a thin line, but wouldn't say anything further, just jotting down another line in her damned notebook. Karen didn't like my old Ford truck either, a 1995 F-150, dark blue, with paint scratched from years of use. I had driven it through thrilling high-speed chases on the highways, camping trips in the wild, and now it rested on the gravel driveway in front of my house. For Karen, it was an aesthetic hazard. "You should park on concrete like everyone else," she would say, her tone commanding as if I were her subordinate. I crossed my arms, leaning against the truck door, and scoffed, "Gravel doesn't crack like your plastic sidewalk, Karen." She would purse her lips, her eyes blazing with fury, as though she wanted to set me on fire right there, but I knew she couldn't do anything. My farm was outside her HOA jurisdiction, a free zone she couldn't touch, and that made her more furious than anything. But the real trouble exploded one calm afternoon as I was brushing Dusty, the old horse I had bought with the farm, standing quietly under a clear blue sky. The sunlight spilled gently onto the grass, filling the air with the sweet scent of freshly cut hay. Dusty stood still, his large eyes half closed in enjoyment, his long tail swishing gently, as if keeping rhythm with the old melody I hummed. Suddenly, a strange buzzing sound cut through the silence, like a giant bee buzzing overhead. I looked up and immediately saw a small, shiny drone hovering above the horse barn. Its camera was pointing straight at me, the sunlight reflecting off its metallic surface, making it look like a curious eye, never blinking. I knew right away it was Karen. She had bragged about her surveillance technology at a neighborhood meeting that Tony T-Rex Ramirez, my friend, had overheard while pretending to mow the lawn. Does she have no boundaries? I muttered, my grip tightening on the brush handle, my knuckles turning white. I waved at the drone with a forced smile, as if greeting an unwelcome guest, then calmly walked into the house. A plan began to form in my mind. I opened the wooden cupboard in the corner of the room, pulling out a 12-gauge shotgun, a gift from my father, who taught me to shoot when I was just a clumsy kid. The weight of the gun in my hand felt familiar, almost like an extension of myself. I stepped outside, aimed at the hovering drone, and fired. The shot rang out, the sharp sound echoing across the fields, sending the nearby birds scattering in panic. The drone exploded into pieces of plastic and metal, falling to the ground like useless confetti. Tony, sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, burst into laughter. Nice shot, Hawk. But she's not going to let it go, my friend. I shrugged, slinging the gun over my shoulder like a trophy. Let her come. I'm ready. Less than 20 minutes later, the whine of the golf cart engine echoed again from afar, growing closer. Karen stormed up to the gate, stopping in a cloud of red dust. She stepped out, her face flushed with anger, her eyes blazing as if she wanted to burn down my farm. She slammed her hand onto the intercom on the gate, shouting, "You've destroyed my personal property. I'll sue you." I stepped out, the gun still slung over my shoulder, my voice calm but cold as steel. Flying a drone over private land without permission is illegal, Karen. You should know that better than anyone. She ground her teeth, her hands balling into fists, her eyes seething with rage as if she wanted to attack me right then and there. "You've made a huge enemy, buddy," she hissed. "I'll make you regret this day." Tony, standing next to me, chewing gum with a look of amusement, whispered, "She's serious, Hawk. I'll bet you $20 she'll bring the SWAT team next week to get her revenge." I chuckled softly, my eyes still fixed on Karen's retreating figure as she stormed back to her golf cart, speeding off in a fury. I wasn't planning on using my DEA identity. After more than a decade of battling through violent drug raids, Tony T-Rex Ramirez and I had decided to step away from the front lines. We transitioned into intelligence gathering from afar, using our experience to analyze data and monitor targets without having to step into dark alleys or face down barrels anymore. This farm, nestled in the dry land of Arizona, was not just a place for rest after years of stress. It was a perfect strategic position. From here, I could monitor the neighboring farm, where we suspected the Los Zetas cartel was running a drug trafficking operation from Phoenix to the border. The investigation had been ongoing for 9 months, a task requiring patience and complete discretion. I spent hours each day hiding behind curtains, binoculars pressed to my eyes, noting every suspicious truck that rolled down the dirt road, every shadowy figure that passed under the dim lights. But Karen, the uninvited neighbor, had no idea. Her curiosity mixed with arrogance was turning her into a dangerous variable, a loose cannon that could derail our entire plan. She started her harassment campaign with frightening persistence. First came a formal complaint to the Homeowners Association, HOA, accusing my farm of being illegally registered and violating building distance regulations, a completely ridiculous claim since my land was outside their jurisdiction. I smirked, ripped up the complaint into small pieces, and tossed them into the trash, thinking she'd soon give up. But Karen wasn't the type to quit easily. Anonymous letters started appearing in my mailbox, written in red ink, the handwriting erratic as if from a madman. "Remove the guns from public view. Stop playing country music after 6 p.m. And once, a line that stopped me cold. "You're being watched." I showed Tony, and he burst into a dry, raspy laugh, the kind from someone who'd smoked too much. "She thinks she's James Bond? I bet she even has cameras in the bushes. Want me to go check?" I shook my head, shoving the pile of letters into a drawer, trying to stay calm. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a growing threat. Then I discovered a bigger secret, one that escalated things beyond control. One night, when I was finally sleeping without nightmares, a strange screeching noise from the water system jolted me awake. I sat up, straining my ears in the silent darkness, and realized the water pressure in my private well was dropping abnormally at 4 a.m. A bad feeling crept over me. I quickly threw on an old jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. The cold night wind hit my face, carrying the scent of dry earth and burning grass. After nearly an hour of searching along the fence, I discovered the culprit. A PVC pipe cleverly buried beneath the soil, leading straight from my well to Karen's rose garden. The garden she always bragged about being the pride of the neighborhood during every tea party with the neighbors. I knelt down, feeling the cold plastic, a surge of anger rising like wildfire. Tony, awakened by my footsteps, lazily stepped outside with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He looked toward the flashlight's beam, then shook his head. "She's not just crazy, she's a twisted genius. I bet she's been planning this for a year." I didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, a mischievous idea flickered in my mind. I quietly installed a diversion valve, redirecting wastewater from the farm's manure pit into that pipe. 2 days later, the area around Karen's house reeked of the foul stench of sewage. Her once proud rose bushes withered in an instant, their bright red petals falling to the brown, dull earth, and the green grass now looked like a pathetic trash dump. Tony stood from a distance, took a long drag, and burst into laughter. "Hawk, you just turned her garden into a public landfill. I want to take a picture and hang it on the wall." Karen didn't waste time responding. That afternoon, she stormed up to my gate like a whirlwind, her face flushed with rage, her golden hair blowing wild in the wind. "What did you do to my irrigation system?" she screamed, her shrill voice cutting through the evening bird songs. I stood leaning against the gatepost, shrugging nonchalantly. "I just helped water your plants, Karen. What's the problem?" she growled, pointing at me. "Don't play dumb. I'll sue you for property damage." Tony, now appearing behind me, chewed gum with an unmistakable grin on his face, chiming in. "Can she even sue when she's stealing water? I think the cops would love to hear about this." Karen froze for a moment, her eyes blazing with fury, but she turned and stormed off, throwing one last threat. "You'll pay for this." I watched her disappear behind the trees, feeling both satisfied and worried. Tony patted my shoulder. "She won't stop, Hawk. Get ready. This is just the beginning of the real battle." Karen didn't sue. She did something worse. With the patience of someone who never abandons their goals, she launched a new campaign, merging my land into the Homeowners Association, HOA. Every day, as the sun just peaked above the horizon, Karen was ready, dressed in a crisp white blouse with the HOA logo embroidered in bright gold, holding a thick stack of documents and a red pen. She went door to door, knocking with a forced smile but cold eyes, pressuring residents to sign her petition. "You know," she said to one neighbor in a sweet voice laced with an underlying threat, "that man, Jack Morrison, is a real danger. He has guns, a vicious dog, and who knows what he's hiding in that horse barn. We need to control his land to protect the safety of the neighborhood." Half of the residents signed the petition, frightened by Karen's subtle pressure. They knew that if they refused, she would find a way to retaliate with absurd fines or surprise inspections. The other half thought she had lost her mind, but no one dared speak out. An old man named Fred, with silver hair and thick glasses, signed the petition while lying flat in bed from food poisoning. 2 days later, after recovering, he hobbled over to my farm, holding a loaf of homemade bread as an apology. "She caught me while I was throwing up," Fred said, his voice trembling with embarrassment. "I didn't think it through, Jack. I'm sorry." I patted his shoulder, feeling the sincerity in his cloudy eyes. "It's fine, Fred," I replied. "I understand. She's a nightmare." But Karen wasn't the main reason I came here, even though her antics were causing trouble. The truth is, I Jack Morrison, didn't choose this farm just to rest after my years as a DEA agent. This place, nestled between low hills and far from the residential area, was an ideal observation point for a secret mission. Not far from my farm, just over a barbed wire fence and down a red dirt road, was Hector Alvarez's land, a notorious money launderer for Los Zetas, one of the most dangerous cartels from Mexico. Alvarez wasn't just a petty criminal. He was a crucial link in the network transporting drugs and dirty money from Phoenix across the border. The DEA had been monitoring him for 2 years, but he was too clever, always keeping his distance and never leaving any openings. Tony T-Rex, Ramirez, and I were tasked with remote surveillance, turning my farm into a covert base to monitor his every move without alerting him. We had installed hidden cameras in the bushes, recorded every radio conversation, and tracked every vehicle that entered and left Alvarez's farm. That was the real reason I came here, not to live peacefully, but to complete a mission that could dismantle part of Los Zetas. But Karen's curiosity and noisy actions were inadvertently threatening the safety of the entire operation. One night, when the sky was pitch black with only a faint moon hanging in the air, Tony was sitting in our makeshift control room, a small room at the back of the house with monitors and listening equipment, when he spotted a black truck parked behind the trees near the farm. The truck had no lights, no license plate, and its engine was off, but its presence exuded a sense of danger. "Hawk, that's not Karen's people," Tony said, his voice tight with a rare tension. "I bet Alvarez is spying on you." I walked over to the window, pulled back the curtain just slightly, and peered through the night vision binoculars. Through the security camera, I clearly saw a large man, wearing sunglasses despite the dark, holding binoculars, watching straight into my horse barn. The moonlight illuminated his chiseled face, revealing a long scar running from his temple to his chin, a sign of someone unafraid of violence. "Karen's making so much noise that she's drawing attention from the cartel," Tony smirked, but his smile couldn't mask his concern. "This is just great." I clenched my fist, the adrenaline surging like the old days on the front lines. "We need to be careful," I said, my voice low but firm. "If Alvarez gets suspicious, he won't hesitate to strike. But I won't let her or the cartel ruin this mission." Karen had no idea that her thoughtless actions had inadvertently stirred both sides. On one hand, there was me, Jack "Hawk" Grayson, along with Tony, 2 DA agents secretly monitoring the activities of Alvarez's cartel in this remote rural area. And on the other hand, there was the cartel, ruthless with anyone who dared to encroach on their territory. With the blind persistence of someone who doesn't recognize limits, Karen decided to escalate her personal battle by hiring a private investigator. The guy's name was Carl, a disheveled man with messy hair like a bird's nest, bleary eyes hidden behind thick glasses, and a scruffy beard that hadn't seen a razor in ages. Carl always wore a worn-out brown trench coat, drove a beat-up silver sedan from the 1980s, its engine roaring and wheels screeching every time he shifted gears. He parked his car behind a thick row of oak trees about 100 meters from my farm, thinking he was hiding expertly with his long telephoto lens aimed at my horse barn. But for a former agent like me, trained to spot surveillance from a distance, Carl's presence was as obvious as a billboard in the middle of an empty field. Tony, ever the prankster, couldn't resist turning the situation into a joke. He dragged a folding chair out to the front yard, placed it right in the line of sight of our surveillance cameras around the farm, and grabbed a large bag of popcorn. Tony plopped down in the chair, munching away, and stared straight into Carl's lens, then waved. "Hey there, buddy. Is filming fun? Want me to strike a cooler pose?" Carl, clearly taken aback by the response, fumbled to quickly detach the lens, even knocking over his cup of cold coffee onto the seat of his car. Less than an hour later, he revved the engine and sped off, leaving a thin trail of smoke from the rusty exhaust pipe. Tony turned to me, laughing loudly. "Hawk, I just sent a second-rate paparazzi packing. But Karen won't stop. She's as stubborn as a mule." And sure enough, Karen had no intention of stopping. Her war with me, originating from my refusal to let her tap into my well water for her land, had now escalated into an unrelenting harassment campaign. One night, when the sky was pitch black with only a faint moon hanging like a weak light streak, I was deep in the rare sleep I'd been craving after several stressful days when the motion sensors around the farm suddenly triggered. Red lights flashed brightly like Christmas decorations, yanking me out of bed. My ears strained in the darkness, listening for the slightest sound. Then I heard it, a soft metallic clink, coming from the cattle gate about 50 meters from the house. Without hesitation, I grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun hanging on the wall, threw on my shorts and rubber boots, and stepped outside. The cold night air hit my bare skin, but the adrenaline surging through me made me feel nothing but sharp focus. I crept up to the gate, sweeping the flashlight over every dark corner. When the light reached the area, I saw Karen. There she was, standing with a rusted steel rod in one hand and a phone in the other, the screen's light casting a determined yet tense glow on her face. She was fiddling with the pipe I knew she had illegally connected to my well weeks ago. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice as cold as steel, the shotgun slung over my shoulder, but my finger already near the trigger, just in case she made a move. Karen startled and spun around, her face pale under the moonlight, her eyes wide in momentary panic. But then she regained her composure, shouting, "You cut off my water. I have the right to take back community resources." Her voice trembled but still held defiance, as if she truly believed she was standing on some firm legal ground. I stepped closer, using my foot to push the heavy iron gate shut behind her, blocking her escape route. Karen panicked, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911, then screamed into the receiver, "Police! I'm being detained by a dangerous man. I'm Karen Voss, the HOA president of this area." Tony, now awake and stepping out of the house with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, stood behind me and chuckled. "She's really calling the cops. I lost $20, Hawk. I bet she's just bluffing." Less than 10 minutes later, a police car slowly rolled down the dirt road leading to the farm, headlights off to avoid drawing attention. Sheriff Bill Dawson stepped out of the car, a tall man with graying hair and eyes as sharp as a razor, holding a flashlight to scan the scene. I'd known Bill for years. He'd been a cop in Phoenix and had assisted the DEA in several major cases before moving to this rural area. When I silently showed him my DEA badge, Bill nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding without the need for lengthy explanations. Karen, standing a few steps away, still didn't realize the gravity of the situation. She continued to scream, "He's locking me up. He's a danger to the neighborhood." But Bill ignored her, his gaze sweeping over 3 unmarked SUVs parked discreetly near the fence. The DA team, ready for a raid on Alvarez's farm just under 2 miles away. "Jack, what's the situation?" Bill asked, his voice low but concerned. "Karen broke in at midnight, trying to sabotage the water line." I replied, pointing at the rusted rod still lying at her feet. Bill sighed and turned to Karen. "You should go home, Karen. Don't make things worse for yourself." But Karen wasn't done. She stomped her foot and yelled, "I have proof. He's hiding drugs in the horse barn." I took pictures. She raised her phone, showing blurry photos of feed bags and fertilizer piles stacked in the barn, things she, with her wild imagination and lack of knowledge, called suspicious chemicals. Karen's report quickly made its way from the local police station to the DEA's narcotics team, and before long, I had it in my hands through Tony. He called me, his voice filled with chuckles. "Hawk, she's officially accusing you of being a drug dealer because your barn smells weird. What do you think of her detective skills?" I sighed, rubbing my temple to suppress the growing frustration. "She's just dug herself into a deep hole," I muttered. Tony, still joking, added, "I bet Alvarez will love it if he finds out someone's snooping around here. She might have accidentally exposed our plan." I fell silent, my eyes following Karen's furious figure as she drove off in her tiny electric golf cart, the engine sputtering and fading into the night. In my mind, an idea flashed. Karen's stupidity, though annoying, could become an unexpected asset. If she kept stirring up the area, Alvarez and his crew could be distracted, maybe even make a mistake. I turned to Bill, who was still standing there with a faint smile on his face. "Handle this for me, will you? But if she doesn't stop, maybe we should let her dig her own grave and drag Alvarez down with her." Instead of stopping Karen, I, Jack Hawk Morrison, decided to turn her stupidity into a strategic advantage. Hector Alvarez, The money laundering kingpin of the Los Zetas cartel we were monitoring was extremely cautious. He never left a trace, always hiding his activities behind the facade of a successful businessman, with shiny trucks and fake smiles at local fundraisers. For the past 9 months, my DEA team had been trying to find a crack in his defense, but had come up empty. Karen, with her boundless curiosity and arrogance larger than my entire farm, was the perfect puppet to stir him up without us having to act directly. I sat down with Tony T-Rex Ramirez in the small control room behind the house, a cramped space filled with screens, listening equipment, and the smell of burnt coffee, to discuss. If she keeps digging, she might just make Alvarez panic, I said, tapping my fingers rhythmically on the table. Tony smirked, chewing gum loudly. Or she'll shoot herself in the foot first. Either way, we win. We agreed. Let Karen do her thing, and wait to see what she accidentally handed us. Karen's blind persistence quickly proved valuable. In her attempt to expose me as a neighborhood threat, she unwittingly handed the DEA a gem. One afternoon, as Karen sneakily circled my horse barn with a cheap camera, she not only took pictures of feed bags and fertilizer piles, which she called suspicious chemicals. Through a crack in the wooden fence, in the corner of one photo, Alvarez appeared clearly. He was standing next to an unmarked truck, gesturing to 2 muscular men unloading sealed crates. This was direct evidence of a shipment that the DEA had been hunting for months, a rare moment when Alvarez showed his face. But instead of sending this photo to the police like any normal person, Karen did something unexpected. She sent it directly to Alvarez via email, with the ridiculous subject line, "Dear Mr. Alvarez, help me deal with Jack Morrison." In her naive mind, Alvarez was the lawful man, perhaps because she had once seen him speak at a community meeting, dressed in a sharp suit and eloquently discussing neighborhood safety. Ironically, she had just handed our golden ticket to the enemy without realizing it. Fortunately, my team had set up surveillance on all communications in the area. Tony intercepted that email before Alvarez had a chance to open it. He rushed into the room, holding a laptop, his eyes wide with excitement like he'd just won the lottery. "Hawk, you need to see this," Tony said, whistling long and loud with enthusiasm. "She's crazy, but she just did our job for us." I leaned over the screen. The photo showed Alvarez standing there, his sharp face and cold eyes fixed on the truck, flanked by 2 familiar henchmen we had noted in our files. The image was clear enough to identify, and although the truck's license plate was blurred, I knew our DEA tech team could restore it. "She has no idea what she's just done," I said, a rare smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "But if she keeps this up, she might dig something else up from Alvarez. Let her run free for a while longer." Tony nodded, chewing his gum harder. "I like this idea. Let her be the puppet, while we pull the strings." That night, the sky was pitch black, with no moonlight breaking through the thick clouds hanging above the Arizona sky. My farm was immersed in silence. Only the sound of crickets and the wind rustling through the old oak trees in the distance. I was sitting in the corner of the house, in front of a desk cluttered with papers and surveillance screens, my eyes scanning the area map to find a way to approach Alvarez without drawing attention. Suddenly, the perimeter alarm went off, and the sensors along the fence flashed red on the screen like an urgent warning. I stood up quickly, reaching for the shotgun hanging on the wall, not because I thought it was a real threat, but because of the reflexes of a former agent always ready for any situation. I opened the door and stepped outside, the cold night air rushing into my lungs, carrying the scent of dry earth and faintly burning grass. The gravel under my feet crunched as I crept toward the eastern fence, where the alarm was blaring. I held my breath, my eyes straining to observe in the darkness, until a faint beam of light from a small flashlight flickered in front of me. And then I saw her. Karen, dressed like an amateur spy in a tight black outfit, wearing a cheap night vision camera set clearly bought from a discount website. In her left hand, she held a thick folder, its red ink smeared on the cover, and in her right hand, a flashlight and a pen, looking like she was preparing to film a self-produced documentary. "The outdoor lights are not approved," Karen mumbled, her voice trembling but filled with excitement, as the flashlight swept over every corner of my farm. "The trees are not native, suspicious chemicals. These are serious violations that need reporting." She stood in front of the fence, pointing everywhere like a self-appointed investigator, completely unaware of how ridiculous she looked. I stepped forward, my shadow stretching long under the faint light from her flashlight. "Karen," I said, my voice low and cold. "What are you doing here?" She jumped, nearly dropping the folder, her eyes wide with a brief panic. But then she quickly regained her composure, stood up straighter, and pointed at me. "I'm collecting evidence against you. Jack Morrison, you're a dangerous element, and I'm going to prove that to everyone in this neighborhood." I took another step forward, the shotgun still slung over my shoulder, my eyes never leaving her. "You're trespassing on private property at midnight," I said, my voice firm. "Who do you think you are, to have the right to do that?" Karen lifted her nose, gripping the folder tightly like a shield. "I'm the HOA president," she declared, her voice full of arrogance, but betraying a hint of trembling. "I have a responsibility to protect the community from people like you." I smirked, not even bothering to respond. Tony, now walking out from the porch with a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, stood back and shook his head in disbelief. "She thinks she's a superhero," he whispered, taking a sip of coffee before laughing quietly. "I bet $20 she'll end up suing herself for breaking and entering before dawn." I turned to Karen, my gaze as cold as steel. "You've gone too far, Karen. This time, I won't let it slide." Instead of calling the police right then, as she had done before, Karen seemed to realize her disadvantage. She took a few steps back, her eyes darting around looking for a way out. "You haven't won yet," she spat, before turning and awkwardly climbing over the barbed wire, leaving a piece of fabric from her torn black shirt stuck on the wire. Tony burst into laughter. "Hawk, she just left DNA for you to use as evidence. Want me to call Bill?" I shook my head, watching Karen's figure disappear into the darkness. "No need," I said, my voice low. "Let her dig her own hole. At this rate, she'll make Alvarez lose patience, and when that happens, we'll have everything we need." The next morning, to prove her crazy persistence, Karen filed another complaint with the police, accusing me of running a drug operation out of the horse barn. Attached were blurry photos of feed bags and fertilizer, along with a scrawled note. "Illegal chemicals. Urgent investigation needed." The complaint quickly made its way to the DEA, and Tony called me, laughing on the phone. "Hawk, she just turned your haystack into heroin in the eyes of the cops. But you know what? In another photo, in the background, there's the shadow of Alvarez's truck again. She doesn't know it, but she just helped us again." I smirked, a mix of frustration and amusement. Karen, with all her foolishness, was unknowingly becoming a key piece in this game. But I knew, if she didn't stop, both Alvarez and we would face unforeseen consequences. After unknowingly helping the DEA again, Karen still wouldn't stop. Her arrogance, now reinforced by her belief that she was protecting the neighborhood, pushed her into a more reckless decision than ever. The morning after fleeing from my farm, Karen organized an emergency HOA meeting at the community hall, a small, rundown building with peeling tiles and mismatched plastic chairs. She stood on the podium, holding a crackling old microphone, dressed in a neatly pressed white blouse with the HOA logo, her sharp green eyes scanning the crowd of about 20 residents who were yawning. "We have a serious threat in the neighborhood," she declared, her tone like that of a wartime leader. "Jack Morrison has violated all our rules, and I have proof that he's linked to dangerous criminals." She raised the thick folder high, now carefully bound like an official report, and projected blurry photos of my barn along with the unintentional photo of Alvarez onto an old, rusty projector. The crowd murmured, some curious, others just wanting to get home and watch football. Fred, the man who had apologized to me earlier, whispered to Mrs. Martha beside him, "She's lost it again. I just want to live in peace." But Karen didn't care. She had gone too far to turn back. What Karen didn't know was that one of the attendees at the meeting wasn't a regular resident. The man sitting in the back row, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a black leather jacket, was Alvarez's henchman, a man known as El Cuervo, the Crow, in the Los Zetas cartel. He had been sent to monitor the area after Alvarez received Karen's strange email, though its contents had been intercepted by Tony. When Karen projected the photo of Alvarez on the screen, El Cuervo squinted, gripping his phone tightly in his pocket. He stood up quietly, left the meeting, and immediately called Alvarez. "Boss, There's a stupid woman here holding your picture and the truck. She's accusing the neighbor, but she knows too much. What should we do? Alvarez, on the other end of the line, stayed silent for a long moment, his voice lowering like cold stone. Take care of both of them. Leave no trace. Meanwhile, Tony and I were at the farm, preparing for the next step of the plan. I sat in front of the surveillance screen, analyzing the photo Karen took, while Tony checked the listening equipment to ensure we could pick up any signals from Alvarez. She really is an accidental gold mine, Tony said, chewing his gum with delight. If she keeps making noise, Alvarez will have to show his hand. But I didn't answer. An ominous feeling suddenly rose in me. I'd faced enough criminals to know when danger was approaching. And then, the perimeter sensors blared again. But this time, not just one point. Both the east, west, and south directions were flashing red. Tony, I said, my voice tense, get the guns ready. We've got company. Tony spat his gum out, reaching for the AR-15 under the table. Damn, is it Alvarez? I stepped outside, shotgun in hand, my eyes scanning the darkness. The night air felt heavy, the scent of dry earth mixed with something else, the faint smell of gasoline from a distance. Then I heard it, the low rumble of engines, not the usual hum of Karen's golf cart, but the deep growl of trucks. 3 black vehicles appeared from different directions, headlights off, quietly surrounding the farm. I turned back to the house, whispering to Tony, we're being ambushed. Call the DEA team now. But before Tony could dial, a familiar figure rushed out from the bushes near the gate. Karen, pale-faced, clutching the folder tightly like a protective charm. Jack, she screamed, panic in her voice. They're chasing me. They have guns. I pulled Karen into the house, slamming the door behind us, while Tony secured the windows with the steel plates we had prepared earlier. What are you doing here? I growled, still gripping my gun. Karen trembled, stammering. I came to warn you. After the meeting, a strange man followed me. He said I knew too much. I looked at Tony, and he smirked. Congrats, Karen. You just poked the hornet's nest of the cartel. Now we all get to die together. The sound of breaking glass echoed from behind the house. A smoke grenade rolled in, and thick white smoke flooded the room. I shouted, get down, and pulled Karen and Tony behind the control desk as gunfire erupted outside. The white smoke from the smoke grenade flooded the small room, stinging my eyes and causing me to cough violently. I dropped to the floor, pulling Karen and Tony down behind the control desk as the sound of gunfire erupted outside like a chaotic symphony. Karen, her face pale and eyes wide with terror, clutched her folder as if it were a life raft. Who are they? What do they want? She stammered, her trembling voice drowned out by the sound of bullets whizzing past the broken window. Tony, gripping the AR-15 tightly, smirked and replied, welcome to the real world, Karen. This isn't your HOA patrol team. This is the cartel, and you just poked their hornet's nest. I shot Tony a glance, signaling for silence, then turned to Karen. What did you do after the meeting? Karen swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she pointed at the folder. I sent another email to Mr. Alvarez, asking him to help me sue you. I thought he was a good guy. I gritted my teeth, frustration bubbling up, but there was no time for reproach. You just signed our death warrant. I growled, pushing her lower when another round of bullets struck the wall behind us. Outside, 3 black trucks had stopped, surrounding the farm from all sides. Figures dressed in black, wearing hoods, jumped out, holding rifles and tactical flashlights, moving quickly like shadows in the night. I counted quickly through the crack in the window. At least 10 of them, maybe more. The sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel, the click of magazines being loaded, and whispers in Spanish filled the cold air. Where's El Cuervo? One man shouted, his voice raspy. A tall figure with a scar running down his face. El Cuervo, the same man I had seen on the camera earlier, stepped out from the darkness, holding a pistol and a gleaming knife. Find that bitch first, he ordered, then deal with the farm owner. The boss wants it clean. I turned to Tony. We can't wait for the DEA team. We need to hold out for at least 20 minutes. Tony nodded, spitting a piece of gum onto the floor. Hawk, you take the front, I'll handle the back. What about her? I glanced at Karen, now huddled in the corner, and coldly said, she stays here. If she moves, I'll shoot her myself before the cartel gets to her. I crawled to the front window, ducking behind the thick wooden wall, and aimed the shotgun through a small gap. The light from the outdoor lamps, the same ones Karen had criticized as unapproved, now became an advantage, illuminating Alvarez's men as they drew near. I took a deep breath, my finger pulling the trigger. One shot rang out, and the nearest man collapsed, blood staining the dry ground. One down. I yelled for Tony to hear. From behind the house, Tony's gunfire responded, accompanied by a yell from another man who had been hit. Two. He laughed, his voice full of excitement, as if he were playing a video game. But Alvarez's men weren't deterred. They returned fire with a barrage of bullets, striking the walls and windows, sending splinters of wood flying. Karen screamed, covering her ears. "We're going to die. I don't want to die here." I turned back, shouting, "Shut up, Karen. If you hadn't started this, we wouldn't be in this mess." Amid the chaos, I heard the sound of engines in the distance. Not Alvarez's vehicles, but the familiar hum of diesel engines from the DEA SUVs. "Rescue team," Tony shouted from behind, but the brief moment of relief was cut short when another grenade rolled through the window, exploding with a deafening bang. I pushed Karen out of the danger zone, smoke and dust filling the room. El Cuervo took advantage of this moment, leading 3 others through the front door. I jumped up, firing a shot that hit one man in the shoulder, but El Cuervo was quick, charging at me and delivering a punch to my face. I fell, the shotgun slipping from my hands, my head buzzing. He raised the knife, its steel gleaming under the dim light, but before the blade could come down, a loud thud rang out. Karen, trembling, had stood up and struck El Cuervo with her thick folder. He staggered, falling to the side, and I quickly grabbed the gun, shooting him in the leg. "Don't die just yet," I panted. "The DEA will want to have a word with you." The sound of DEA sirens grew louder, headlights cutting through the smoke. The SWAT team rushed in, shouting DEA, "Hands up," drowning out the remaining gunfire from Alvarez's men. El Cuervo groaned on the floor, clutching his leg, while Karen sat down, blinking in disbelief at what she had just done. Tony walked over, patting me on the shoulder. "Hawk, I just lost another $20. Didn't expect her to be useful." I looked at Karen, my expression a mix of anger and surprise. "You just saved my life, but don't expect me to thank you." Karen bit her lip, her voice weak. I just wanted to protect the neighborhood." I shook my head, not bothering to respond, as the DEA team cuffed El Cuervo and began to search Alvarez's farm nearby. As the first light of dawn broke over the dry hills of Arizona, my farm looked like a battlefield hastily cleaned up. Smoke from the grenades still lingered in the air, blending with the scent of damp earth and burnt gunpowder. Broken glass was scattered on the floor, the wooden walls pockmarked with bullet holes, and a few feed bags in the horse barn had been torn apart, revealing dry hay swirling in the morning wind. The DEA team had finished the arrests. El Cuervo, clutching his leg and groaning, was handcuffed and shoved into an armored truck along with 4 surviving henchmen. Alvarez's farm, 2 miles away, was now a chaotic scene with police and agents combing through every corner, pulling out crates full of drugs and cash. Enough evidence to send Alvarez to prison for life, if he wasn't taken out by Los Zetas first. I stood leaning against the broken window frame, the shotgun still slung over my shoulder, watching the DEA team work with a sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. Our 9-month mission was finally over, but the price had been one unforgettable night. Tony Terex Ramirez walked up, holding a freshly brewed cup of coffee from the backup machine in the DEA team's truck, his face covered in dust, but his eyes still shining with humor. "Hawk, you owe me $40, he said, grinning. $20 for Karen calling the cops last time, and $20 for her hitting that cartel guy with her folder. I didn't expect to lose bets this much." I chuckled hoarsely, my voice still rough from the battle. "Consider it payment for keeping you alive through the night." Tony shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. "All right, but I still want to tell this story at my kid's wedding." Uncle Jack and Crazy Aunt beat the cartel with a stack of papers. I shook my head, my gaze shifting to Karen, who was sitting on the porch, still clutching the now torn and blood-stained folder of El Cuervo. Karen looked worse than ever. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, covered in dust and sweat, and the white blouse she wore had a large tear on the shoulder, exposing reddened skin from scratches as she climbed over the fence. Her eyes blinked rapidly, as though she couldn't quite believe she had just survived a cartel attack. I stepped closer, standing in front of her, my shadow stretching across the wooden floor. "You all right?" I asked, my voice no longer as cold as before, but lacking any sympathy. Karen looked up, her lips pressed tightly, then suddenly burst out. "I don't need you asking. I just wanted to protect the neighborhood." I smirked, not bothering to argue. "Protect the neighborhood by poking a drug lord? You did a great job, Karen." She glared at me, but then her expression softened, replaced by an uncommon look of confusion. "I didn't know Mr. Alvarez was a criminal," she whispered, gripping the folder tightly as if it could save her from the truth. "I just thought he would help me sue you." Tony, a few steps away, burst into laughter. "Karen, you just survived a Los Zetas ambush by hitting a hitman with paperwork. I suggest you write a book, How to Survive by Being Stupid." Karen flushed, about to retort, but then fell silent, perhaps for the first time in her life, unable to find words. I sat down on the porch next to her, the exhaustion flooding my body. "Look," I said, my voice deeper. "You caused a lot of trouble, but you also unintentionally helped us catch Alvarez. I don't know whether to hate you or thank you." Karen blinked, surprised at my words, then bit her lip. "I don't need your thanks. But maybe I was wrong calling you a dangerous element." That was the closest to an apology I had ever heard from her, and I simply nodded, not wanting to prolong the conversation. Sheriff Bill Dawson stepped forward, holding a new stack of papers. This time, it was the official DA report. "Jack," he said, his voice low but friendly, "we've finished the search of Alvarez's farm. Dozens of kilos of cocaine, cash, and even a client list, enough to take down the whole network in Phoenix. Your mission is complete." He glanced at Karen, raising an eyebrow. "As for her, we should probably investigate what she's involved in regarding the email she sent to Alvarez." Karen jumped, about to protest, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Bill, she doesn't know anything," I said, signaling him to drop it. "She's just an overly enthusiastic neighbor." Bill nodded, still skeptical, before turning to direct the cleanup of the scene. As the first rays of sunlight stretched across the field, I stood up, looking around the farm, which had returned to its quiet state, at least for now. Tony slapped me on the back. "Hawk, what's next? Real retirement, or diving into another case?" I gave a faint smile. "I want some peace for a while. But with neighbors like Karen, I doubt it'll be that easy." Karen, hearing her name, stood up, brushing dust off her clothes and clearing her throat. "I won't bother you anymore, Jack. But your horse barn still messes up the community's color palette." Tony burst into laughter, while I just shook my head, heading back into the house, leaving her standing there with the torn folder. In that moment, I realized that although Alvarez had been caught, and the mission had ended, life here would never truly be normal, not with a neighbor like Karen Voss. As the evening sun cast a golden hue over my farm, it seemed to soothe the scars it had endured from that fateful night. I, Jack Hawk Morrison, stood on the porch, holding a cup of now-cold coffee, watching Dusty leisurely graze in the Red Horse barn, the color that had once driven Karen mad but now symbolized resilience. Tony Terex Ramirez sat next to me, his feet resting on an old wooden crate, holding the last beer from the Dia team's fridge. "Hawk," he said, his voice deep with a touch of humor, "do you think we did something big? Not just catching Alvarez, but changing this neighborhood." I took a sip of coffee, my eyes scanning the peaceful field. "Maybe, but I just want to rest, Tony. A place without guns, without cartels, and without anyone measuring the trees." Tony laughed. "I'm still keeping that $20. You'll remember these crazy days, though." Not far off, Karen Voss was finishing her last hours of community service. She stood beneath the oak tree in the neighborhood park, holding a broom to sweep leaves, her bright orange protective suit stained from days of hard work. Her blonde hair, tied back behind her head, wasn't as sleek as before, but her eyes still sparkled with that familiar sense of pride. I walked over, not to mock her, but for another reason, something I had been thinking about since the battle. "Karen," I called, my voice flat. She stopped sweeping and looked up at me, cautious. "What now, Jack? I've finished my 100 hours. What else do you want?" I placed my coffee cup on a nearby bench and said, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to say that, Despite you messing everything up, you did help change this neighborhood. On your own terms. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting those words. I don't need your pity, she replied. But her tone wasn't as harsh as before. I shrugged and sat down on the bench next to her, exhaustion filling my body. It's not pity. I used to think you were a nightmare, but that night, when you hit El Cuervo with that folder, I realized something. Sometimes being stubborn can save people. You weren't completely wrong in wanting to protect this place. It's just your way, a little over the top. Karen was silent, gripping the broom handle tightly, then suddenly sat down beside me, keeping just enough distance to hold on to her last bit of pride. I didn't know who Mr. Alvarez was, she whispered, her eyes on the children playing on the grass she had just swept clean. I just wanted everything to be perfect, for everyone. I nodded. Perfect doesn't exist, Karen. But this neighborhood is better now, not because of your rules, but because you accidentally made us look at ourselves. Karen's light punishment, 100 hours of community service and a year-long ban from being HOA president, turned out to be the beginning of a bigger change. Under Mr. Fred's leadership, the HOA was no longer an organization that imposed silly rules. He organized community picnics, encouraged people to plant flowers, paint their houses however they liked, and even let the kids paint on the walls of the community hall, something Karen had once called vandalism. One afternoon, I saw her standing by, watching the kids play, holding an ice cream given to her by Mrs. Martha, a rare smile tugging at the corner of her lips, without a complaint attached. Maybe she had learned that a community doesn't need control to be beautiful. It needs tolerance and sharing. As Tony and I prepared for our fishing trip, a real vacation after months of chaos, I looked back at the farm one last time. Karen walked up to the gate, no longer holding the folder or binoculars, just offering one simple remark. Jack, if you leave, don't sell this farm. It's part of the neighborhood now. I smirked. I'll think about it. But you keep this neighborhood peaceful for me. No more measuring fences. She scoffed lightly, but her gaze no longer challenged me. There was a hint of respect in her eyes. As my truck and Tony's pulled away from the dirt road, I realized that life isn't just about battles with cartels or arguments with neighbors. Sometimes, the real meaning lies in finding a way to coexist with different people, like me, Tony, and even Karen. This neighborhood, with all its scars and new lights, was proof of that. And if you're hearing this story, I invite you to share your thoughts. What would you do if you lived next to a Karen like that? Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, HOA Karen Files on YouTube, where I tell stories about strange neighbors, ridiculous rules, and how we find light in the middle of chaos. Together, we can make every neighborhood a better place to live.